Picture this: what if the kid who dreamed of becoming Hokage was actually a 3,000-year-old demon king with serious anger management issues? I'm talking about Naruto waking up with memories that aren't his own, Elizabeth dying in his arms across centuries, commanding armies of darkness, wielding power that could crack reality itself. Because surprise, he's Meliodas reborn and his chakra just got a massive, terrifying upgrade. Meliodas isn't just strong, he's broken. Full counter that sends your own attacks back doubled. Check. Assault mode that makes him a walking natural disaster. Absolutely. 3 millennia of combat experience? You bet. Now dump all that into a 16-year-old who still eats ramen for breakfast. But here's the kicker: Sasuke's having the same problem. Except he's channeling Zeldris, and brotherly reunions in the Demon Royal family tend to involve a lot more property damage. Our story. Naruto's racing against time to master powers that could save or damn everyone he loves, while ancient evils stir, and the very concept of identity gets turned inside out. It's psychological horror meets shonen action, and trust me, you've never seen anything like it. Hit that like if you're ready for chaos, and let's jump in. The scream tore from Naruto's throat before he even realized he was awake. He sat up in his narrow bed, chest heaving, cold sweat making his orange pajamas stick to his skin. The dream, no, not a dream, something else entirely, clung to him like smoke. A woman with silver hair falling through his fingers, blood on pristine white fabric. Her voice, soft and forgiving even as life left her eyes. Elizabeth, the name slipped out before he could stop it, foreign on his tongue yet achingly familiar. Who the hell was Elizabeth? Naruto ran shaking hands through his blonde hair, trying to shake off the lingering images. This was the third time this week. The dreams were getting stronger, more vivid, and always the same woman dying in different ways, in different places, across what felt like centuries. His alarm clock read 4:17 a.m. No point trying to sleep now. Naruto pulled on his usual orange tracksuit and grabbed a carton of expired milk from his mostly empty fridge. The apartment felt smaller somehow, like the walls were pressing in on him. Everything had felt different since the mission to bring Sasuke back, since he'd failed. The walk to the training grounds helped clear his head a little. Dawn was still an hour away, but Naruto had always preferred training when the world was quiet. Fewer people around to see him struggle with techniques that should have been simple by now. He started with basic kata, letting muscle memory take over while his mind wandered. But even the familiar movements felt off. His stance was too rigid, his strikes more precise than they should be. Since when did he fight like he was holding back incredible power? Focus, he muttered to himself, forming the hand seals for Shadow Clone Jutsu. A dozen copies popped into existence, but something was wrong. Instead of their usual cheerful grins, they all wore expressions he'd never seen on his own face, ancient, weary, like they'd seen too much. One of them looked at him with what could only be described as disappointment. "What's wrong with you guys?" Naruto asked. The clones exchanged glances before the nearest one shrugged. "You tell us, boss. You're the one making us." Before Naruto could respond, they launched into their usual sparring routine, but within minutes he noticed the differences. His movements were more fluid, more deadly. When one clone came at him with a kunai, Naruto didn't dodge. He caught the blade between 2 fingers and snapped it without thinking. The clone stared at its broken weapon. "Since when can you do that?" "I don't know." The honesty in his own voice scared him. He dismissed the clones and tried basic chakra exercises instead. Roll a leaf around his palm, maintain 3 tree-walking positions simultaneously, the usual stuff. But his chakra felt different, heavier, like it was mixed with something else. Something dark. When he held his hand up to examine the energy swirling around his fingers, he could swear it flickered between blue and black. "Yo, Naruto!" He spun around to find Jiraiya approaching, his white hair even messier than usual. The older man's expression was casual, but his eyes were sharp. He'd been watching. "Pervy sage. What are you doing here so early?" "Could ask you the same thing, kid. Heard you screaming from 3 blocks away." Jiraiya settled cross-legged on a nearby log. "Nightmares again?" Naruto's jaw tightened. "They're not nightmares, they're. I don't know what they are. Want to talk about it? Would it help? Probably not," Jiraiya said with surprising honesty, "but sometimes saying things out loud makes them less scary." Naruto sat down across from him, picking at the grass. "There's this woman, silver hair, kind eyes, and she keeps dying. Over and over in different ways, different times. Sometimes she's wearing modern clothes, sometimes old-fashioned dresses, sometimes armor. But it's always the same woman, and I'm always too late to save her." "Sounds like guilt dreams," Jiraiya said carefully. About failing to bring Sasuke back. That's what I thought at first, but Naruto hesitated. I don't think I've ever met this woman, but in the dreams, I love her, not like a crush or whatever, like I've loved her for 1,000 years. Jiraiya was quiet for a long moment. People don't usually dream about strangers with that kind of detail. Yeah, well, I'm not exactly normal, am I? Naruto's voice carried a bitterness that surprised them both. No, Jiraiya agreed, you're not. But that's not necessarily a bad thing. They sat in comfortable silence until the sun started creeping over the horizon. Other early risers began filtering into the training grounds, academy students with their instructors, a few Chunin running drills. Normal ninja doing normal things. Come on, Jiraiya said, standing and stretching. Let's work on your Rasengan. Maybe some physical training will help clear your head. But it didn't help. If anything, the training made things worse. Naruto's Rasengan formed faster than it ever had, the sphere of chakra spinning with perfect stability. But when he looked closely, he could see dark threads woven through the blue energy. And when he slammed it into a training post, the wood didn't just splinter, it disintegrated completely. Whoa, Jiraiya said, examining the remains. That's new. I didn't mean to do that. I know. Let's try something else. Jiraiya moved to a safer distance and began forming hand seals. I'm going to hit you with a mid-level fire jutsu, just dodge it, nothing fancy. Naruto nodded and settled into a ready stance. But when the fire came roaring toward him, he didn't dodge. Instead, his hand shot up instinctively, and something impossible happened. The fire jutsu bounced off his palm like it had hit a mirror, flying back toward Jiraiya twice as strong as before. The old sage barely managed to dodge, his eyebrows getting singed in the process. They both stared at each other in shock. What the hell was that? Jiraiya demanded. I don't know. Naruto looked at his hand like it belonged to someone else. I just felt like I should send it back, like it was the most natural thing in the world. Jiraiya approached slowly, his expression serious. Naruto, I've never seen anything like that technique. It's not in any scroll, not part of any bloodline limit I know of. Where did you learn it? I didn't learn it, it just happened. Things like that don't just happen, especially not to you. The Nine Tails doesn't have abilities like that. At the mention of Kurama, Naruto felt a familiar stirring in his chest. But instead of the fox's usual grumpy presence, there was something else, surprise, maybe even alarm. Kid, Kurama's voice echoed in his mind, unusually subdued. What was that power you just used? You felt it too? Felt it. I've been feeling it for weeks. There's something else inside you, something that wasn't there before. Something old. The conversation was interrupted by the sound of footsteps. Kakashi appeared at the edge of the training ground, his visible eye taking in the destroyed training post and Jiraiya's singed appearance. Should I ask? He said mildly. Naruto's developing some new abilities, Jiraiya said, which wasn't exactly a lie. We're trying to figure out what they are. Kakashi's eye sharpened as it focused on Naruto. Interesting. I've noticed changes in his fighting style lately, more calculated, less impulsive. Yesterday, during our team training, he anticipated Sakura's attacks like he'd fought her 100 times before. I'm standing right here, Naruto protested. Yes, and you're also avoiding eye contact, which you never do, Kakashi observed. What aren't you telling us? Naruto looked between his two teachers, both of them studying him with expressions he couldn't quite read. How could he explain dreams about a woman who died repeatedly across centuries? How could he describe the growing certainty that he was someone else, someone who had done terrible things? I think, he said carefully, something's wrong with me. Wrong how? Kakashi moved closer, his posture shifting into full sensei mode. Like I'm remembering things that never happened, or maybe they did happen, just not to me. And my chakra's been acting weird, and I keep having these instincts about fighting that I never learned. Kakashi exchanged a look with Jiraiya. Show me. Show you what? Whatever you did to that training post. Naruto hesitated, then formed another Rasengan. This time, he let the dark threads weave through it more deliberately, watching as the blue sphere took on an almost sinister quality. When he released it at another post, the results were the same, complete disintegration. And the reflection technique? Kakashi asked. Jiraiya fired off a simple water jutsu, and again Naruto's hand moved without conscious thought. The technique bounced back, doubled in power, soaking Jiraiya thoroughly. Kakashi was quiet for a long moment. Those aren't ninja techniques, he said finally. They're something else entirely, something I've never seen before. Great, Naruto said, slumping. So I'm officially a freak. You've always been a freak, Jiraiya said, wringing out his sleeve. The question is what kind of freak you're turning into. They spent another hour trying to understand Naruto's new abilities but made little progress. The reflection power only worked on jutsu, not physical attacks. The enhanced Rasengan seemed tied to his emotional state. And through it all, Naruto couldn't shake the feeling that he was holding back, that there was much more power lurking beneath the surface. By the time they called it quits, the sun was high and the training ground was busy with other teams. Naruto felt drained, not from physical exhaustion, but from the constant mental strain of keeping something locked away. He made his excuses and headed home, ignoring Kakashi's suggestion that he should see Tsunade about his condition. The last thing he needed was the Hokage poking around in his head. His apartment felt even smaller when he returned, like the walls had moved in while he was gone. Naruto kicked off his sandals and headed for the bathroom, planning to splash cold water on his face and maybe figure out what to make for lunch. But when he looked in the mirror, he froze. For just a moment, maybe half a second, his reflection showed someone else. Blonde hair, yes, but longer. Same blue eyes, but with an ancient weariness that had no business being on a 16-year-old's face. And most disturbing of all, for that brief instant, his eyes had flickered gold. Naruto blinked hard and looked again. Just his normal reflection stared back, but he couldn't shake what he'd seen. "What's happening to me?" he whispered to his reflection. But deep down, in a place he didn't want to acknowledge, he thought he might already know. The name Elizabeth whispered through his mind again, bringing with it a wave of grief so profound it nearly knocked him to his knees. And underneath that grief was something else. Guilt so massive it felt like it could crush mountains. Whatever was happening to him, whatever he was becoming, Naruto had the sinking feeling that it was just the beginning. 3 days passed before Naruto worked up the courage to leave his apartment for anything other than training. He'd spent those days staring at his ceiling, replaying the mirror incident over and over. The face he'd seen, older, sadder, carrying the weight of unimaginable sins, haunted him worse than the dreams about Elizabeth. At least in the dreams, he was trying to save someone. The face in the mirror looked like someone who had given up on salvation entirely. But he couldn't hide forever. His fridge was empty, his laundry was piling up, and Sakura had left 3 increasingly worried messages asking why he'd missed their scheduled team meeting. The walk to Ikaraku's should have been comforting. The familiar route, the promise of ramen, old man Tuchai's cheerful greeting, all the normal things that usually made him feel better. Instead, every step felt wrong. The bustling village streets seemed too bright, too loud. People's laughter grated against his ears like nails on a chalkboard. Since when do I hate the sound of people being happy? "Naruto," Ayame waved from behind the counter as he approached the ramen stand. "We haven't seen you in days." "The usual." He nodded and slumped onto a stool, not trusting his voice. Even Ayame's friendly smile felt like too much to handle right now. While waiting for his order, Naruto became aware of conversations around him. Normally he'd tune out the background chatter, but today every word seemed important, like he was listening for threats that might not even exist. "Heard there was another attack on a supply convoy. The Akatsuki are getting bolder. My nephew graduated from the academy, but with everything happening, I worry about sending him on missions." The worry in their voices stirred something deep in his chest. Not the usual empathy that made him want to protect everyone, this was different. Heavier. Like he'd heard these exact conversations before, in different places, different times. Like he'd failed to protect people from threats they couldn't even imagine. What kind of threats? Images flashed through his mind. Cities burning, people screaming, darkness spreading across the land like a plague. And at the center of it all, a figure wreathed in black flames, destroying everything in his path. "Here you go," Ayame's voice snapped him back to the present. She set down a steaming bowl of miso ramen, but her expression had shifted from cheerful to concerned. "Are you okay? You look pale." "Just tired," he managed, picking up his chopsticks with hands that shook slightly. The first bite should have been heaven, it always was, but today the rich broth tasted like ash in his mouth. Everything felt muted, like he was experiencing life through thick glass. "This is what it feels like to lose your soul," a voice whispered in his mind, not Kurama's voice, something else entirely. Naruto dropped his chopsticks with a clatter. "Sorry," he mumbled, leaving money on the counter and fleeing before Ayame could ask more questions. The village streets blurred past as he walked without direction, lost in thoughts that felt too old for his 16-year-old brain. He needed to find somewhere quiet, somewhere he could think without people staring at him with expressions that ranged from curious to worried to Naruto-kun. He stopped so abruptly that a Chunin walking behind him nearly collided with his back. That voice, soft and uncertain, cut through the fog in his mind like a blade. Hinata stood a few feet away, her pale eyes wide with concern. She was holding a basket of vegetables, probably returning from the market. Her long dark hair caught the afternoon sunlight, and for a moment, just a moment, Naruto saw silver instead of indigo. Elizabeth. The name hit him like a physical blow. But this time it wasn't accompanied by images of death and loss. Instead, he saw gentle hands tending wounds, a patient smile as someone learned to read, soft laughter in a garden filled with flowers. "You're not her," he said without thinking. Hinata blinked, clearly confused. What? Smooth idiot. Sorry, He ran a hand through his hair, trying to find words that wouldn't make him sound completely insane. "I'm not feeling great today." Her expression immediately shifted to worry. "Are you sick? You do look pale, and you missed training yesterday." Sakura-chan was concerned. The genuine care in her voice made his chest ache. When was the last time someone had worried about him without wanting something in return? When was the last time someone had looked at him like he was worth protecting? All the time, a memory whispered. "She looked at you like that all the time, and you still couldn't save her." "Naruto-kun." Hinata stepped closer, and he caught a faint scent of lavender from her hair. "Should I walk you home? Or maybe to the hospital?" "No." The word came out sharper than he intended, making her flinch. "I mean, no, thank you, I'm fine." But he wasn't fine. Being near her was triggering something, memories that felt like looking through someone else's eyes. A woman with silver hair teaching him to read. The same woman bandaging his wounds after a particularly brutal training session. Her voice, patient and kind, talking him through a panic attack in the middle of the night. "I have to protect her," the thought came unbidden. "I can't let her die again." "Again?" Hinata tilted her head. "I don't understand." "Shit, did I say that out loud?" "Nothing, just." Thinking out loud, he started backing away, panic rising in his throat. "I should go, training and stuff." But Hinata surprised him by stepping forward instead of letting him retreat. "Naruto-kun, you're scaring me. Please tell me what's wrong." The simple request, spoken with such genuine concern, nearly undid him completely. How could he explain that he was losing his mind, that he was remembering a life that couldn't possibly be his? That every time he looked at her, he saw someone he'd loved and lost across centuries. "I think," he said carefully, "I'm going crazy." To her credit, Hinata didn't laugh or brush off his concern. Instead, she set down her basket and gave him her full attention. "What makes you think that?" "I'm remembering things that never happened, having dreams about people I've never met. And my chakra," he held up his hand, letting a small amount of energy swirl around his fingers. Even in the afternoon sunlight, the dark threads were visible. "Something's wrong with me." Hinata studied the chakra with the intensity of someone who'd spent years mastering chakra control herself. "It looks different," she said finally. "Older somehow, like it's been refined over a much longer period than should be possible for someone our age." Her insight surprised him. Most people wouldn't have noticed the subtle differences, but Hinata had always been more observant than she let on. "There's something else," she continued, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "Sometimes when you look at me, your expression changes, like you're seeing someone else entirely. Too perceptive for her own good, just like Elizabeth had been." "Maybe I am," he admitted. They stood in silence for a moment, the busy street continuing around them while they remained frozen in their own bubble of uncertainty. "Do you want to talk about it?" Hinata asked. "Sometimes it helps to share the burden." Share the burden. The phrase triggered another flash of memory, sitting in a tavern with 6 figures he couldn't quite make out, each of them carrying their own weight of sin and regret. A brotherhood forged in shared guilt and the determination to atone. "I don't think you'd believe me," he said. "Try me." Something in her tone, patient, accepting, prepared for whatever he might reveal, reminded him so strongly of Elizabeth that his chest ached. But this wasn't Elizabeth. This was Hinata, who had always seen the best in him even when he couldn't see it himself. "Not here," he said, glancing around at the crowded street. "Too many people?" She nodded and picked up her basket. "My clan's training ground is private. We could go there." 20 minutes later, they sat across from each other in a secluded garden behind the Hyuga compound. Hinata had insisted on making tea, giving Naruto time to organize his thoughts and figure out where to begin. "The dreams started after the mission to retrieve Sasuke," he said finally. "At first I thought they were just nightmares about failing, but they're too detailed, too specific. I see places I've never been, people I've never met. And there's this woman." He described the dreams as best he could, Elizabeth's various deaths, the overwhelming grief that accompanied each one, the sense of having loved her across multiple lifetimes. Hinata listened without interruption, her pale eyes serious and focused. "And today, when I saw you," he continued, his voice dropping, "for a moment I thought you were her. The resemblance isn't physical, but something about your presence, your energy, it's similar." "Do you think I'm her reincarnation?" Hinata asked without a trace of skepticism. "I don't know, maybe. Or maybe I'm just losing my mind and seeing connections that aren't there." Hinata sipped her tea thoughtfully. "My grandmother used to tell stories about souls that were bound together across lifetimes. She said love that strong couldn't be contained by a single existence." "You don't think I'm crazy? I think you're dealing with something beyond normal experience," she said carefully. "But crazy? No. You're too consistent in your descriptions, too troubled by what you're seeing. Delusions usually feel good to the person experiencing them. This clearly doesn't." Her acceptance of his story, her willingness to take him seriously, made him want to tell her everything. About the face in the mirror, about the strange new abilities, about the growing certainty that he was someone else entirely. But before he could continue, a commotion from the direction of the main compound interrupted them. Shouting voices, the sound of running feet, and underneath it all, a chakra signature that felt familiar yet wrong. "Stay here," Naruto said, rising to his feet. "Like hell," Hinata replied, already activating her Byakugan. "There are 3 injured Chunin heading this way, and, Naruto-kun, there's something chasing them. Something with a chakra signature I've never seen before." They reached the compound's main courtyard just as the fleeing Chunin collapsed through the gates. Their clothes were torn, their chakra nearly depleted, and all 3 bore identical looks of terror. "What happened?" Hiyashi Hyuga demanded, appearing with several other clan members. "The mission," one of the Chunin gasped. "We were escorting a merchant caravan to the border. Something attacked us. Not human, not animal. It moved like shadow and struck like lightning." "Demon," another whispered. "It had to be a demon." The word hit Naruto like a physical blow. Images flashed through his mind, creatures of darkness, ancient beings of immense power, a war that had raged for millennia. And at the center of it all, a figure wreathed in black flames leading an army of nightmares. The Demon King. "Where?" Hiyashi asked. 3 miles northeast near the old shrine. It's still there, still hunting." "We barely escaped." Naruto felt something stir in his chest, not fear but recognition. Whatever had attacked these Chunin, it was connected to him somehow. He could feel it calling, like recognizing like. "I have to go," he said, already moving toward the gates. "Naruto-kun, wait," Hinata caught his arm. "You can't face something like that alone." "I won't be alone," he said, though he wasn't entirely sure what he meant by that. Something was building inside him, rising from depths he hadn't known existed. Power that felt ancient and terrible and completely natural. For the first time since the dreams began, he felt like himself, not the confused, frightened boy who'd been stumbling through the past few days, but someone older. Someone who had faced demons before, someone who had been a demon. "Naruto-kun," Hinata's voice was urgent. "Your chakra, it's changing." He looked down at his hands and saw dark energy swirling around them, no longer the subtle threads he'd noticed before, but waves of power that made the air itself seem to vibrate. "I know," he said, and his voice carried an authority that surprised them both. "Don't follow me. Whatever happens, don't follow me." He was gone before she could respond, moving faster than he ever had before, leaving only the fading echo of power that felt older than the village itself. Behind him, Hinata stared at the space he'd occupied, her Byakugan still active. What she saw in the residual chakra traces made her breath catch. For just a moment, overlaying Naruto's familiar energy signature, she'd glimpsed something else. Something that felt like it had existed for thousands of years, carrying the weight of countless battles and unimaginable sins. And despite the terror that realization should have brought, all she felt was worry, not for the village, not for the demon that had attacked the Chunin, but for Naruto himself. Whatever he was becoming, whatever he had been, she could see the pain it was causing him. And if her grandmother's stories were true, if they really were bound across lifetimes, then his pain was hers as well. "Please be careful," she whispered to the empty air. 3 miles away, something ancient and terrible felt her concern like a warm hand on his shoulder, and for the first time in days, Naruto Uzumaki smiled. It wasn't a particularly nice smile. The forest felt different under Naruto's feet as he raced toward the old shrine. Every step seemed to awaken something in the earth itself. Leaves rustled without wind, shadows deepened despite the afternoon sun, and small animals fled before him like they could sense the predator he was becoming. He'd never moved this fast before. Trees blurred past in streaks of green and brown, but his vision remained crystal clear, picking out details that should have been impossible to see at this speed. The path ahead unfolded in his mind like he'd traveled it 1,000 times before. Because you have, a voice whispered in his head. Not Kurama's gruff presence, but something older. Something that remembered when these forests were young. The first sign of the battle was the smell, sulfur, and burning flesh, with an underlying sweetness that spoke of corrupted magic. Naruto's nose wrinkled instinctively, though the scent triggered a flood of unwanted familiarity. He'd smelled it before, in places where the barrier between worlds grew thin. He slowed as he approached the shrine, using trees for cover while his enhanced senses cataloged everything around him. The merchant caravan was scattered across the clearing, overturned wagons, spilled goods, horses nowhere to be seen. But no bodies. Either the merchants had escaped or... A low growl echoed from the direction of the shrine itself, followed by the wet sound of something being torn apart. Naruto crept closer, climbing a thick oak to get a better view. What he saw made his blood run cold. The thing crouched over the shrine's altar wasn't quite a demon and wasn't quite human. It stood maybe 7 feet tall, with skin that looked like charcoal and muscles that rippled with unnatural strength. Its face was a twisted mockery of human features, and its eyes glowed the same sickly yellow as infected wounds. In its claws was what remained of one of the merchants, an older man whose terrified face was frozen in his final moment. Naruto's hands clenched involuntarily, and power surged through him like lightning through water. The dark chakra he'd been trying to suppress roared to life, no longer content to hide beneath the surface. "You know what this is?" the ancient voice whispered. "You know what you have to do." Images flashed through his mind, not dreams this time, but memories. Standing in a throne room carved from black stone, surrounded by creatures far worse than the thing below. Commanding armies of demons with a casual wave of his hand. The fear in people's eyes when they heard his name spoken. Meliodas, the dragon's sin of wrath, the demon king. The memories hit him like an avalanche, 3,000 years of existence crashing into his 16-year-old mind all at once. He remembered Elizabeth, not just her deaths, but their first meeting. The way she'd looked at him without fear even when his demon mark was fully manifested. The centuries they'd spent together, the quiet moments between battles, the promise he'd made to find a way to break their curse. He remembered his father, the original Demon King, and the war that had torn apart both the human and demon realms. He remembered his own rage when Elizabeth died the first time, the way he'd carved a path of destruction across the land in his grief. He remembered leading the 10 Commandments, being worshipped and feared in equal measure. He remembered the genocide he'd committed in his father's name, entire cities reduced to ash because they dared to resist demon rule. All those people. All that blood on my hands. The guilt was overwhelming, a weight that felt like it could crush mountains. How many innocents had died because of his actions, how many lives had been destroyed by his wrath, and now I'm supposed to be a hero. The bitter irony wasn't lost on him. Naruto Uzumaki, the boy who'd dreamed of being Hokage, who'd sworn to protect everyone in his village, was the reincarnation of one of history's greatest monsters. Below him, the demon finished its grisly meal and began sniffing the air. Its head turned in his direction, yellow eyes scanning the tree line. It can sense me, Naruto realized. It knows what I am. The demon opened its mouth and spoke in a voice like grinding stone. "I smell you, young king. I feel your power awakening. Why do you hide among the trees like a frightened child?" Naruto dropped from the oak, landing in the clearing with barely a sound. The demon's eyes widened with recognition and something that might have been reverence. "My lord," it said, dropping to one knee, "you have returned to us at last. The demon realm has waited so long for your awakening." "I'm not your lord," Naruto said, but his voice carried an authority that made even him pause. "And I'm not your king." The demon's head tilted like a confused dog. "But you are, I can feel it. The power of the Demon King flows through your veins. You are Meliodas, returned to lead us once again." "Meliodas is dead." The words tasted like ash in his mouth. "Dead?" The demon laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "You cannot die, my king. You are eternal, bound to return whenever the world needs to remember true power." Images flashed through Naruto's mind, himself standing over burning cities, demon armies marching at his command, the screams of the innocent mixing with his own laughter. The memories felt real because they were real. He'd done those things, he'd been that monster, but I don't have to be that monster again. "You're right," he said quietly. "I am Meliodas, or I was. But that's not who I choose to be now." The demon's expression shifted from reverence to confusion. Choose. My lord, you're what you are. You cannot change your nature any more than fire can choose not to burn. Watch me. Power erupted from Naruto like a volcano, dark chakra mixing with demon magic in ways that should have been impossible. The ground cracked beneath his feet, trees bent away from the sheer force of his presence, and the air itself seemed to scream. But instead of the destructive rampage the demon expected, Naruto held the power in check, controlled it, shaped it into something that served his will rather than commanding it. I was the Demon King, he said, his voice carrying across the clearing like thunder. I commanded armies of darkness and brought kingdoms to their knees. I was feared across multiple realms and worshipped by creatures of nightmare. The demon nodded eagerly. Yes, my lord, and now you can reclaim that glory. The human world has grown soft in your absence. They've forgotten what it means to kneel before true power. No, Naruto took a step forward and his power shifted, still massive, still ancient, but tempered by something the demon couldn't understand. I've seen what that power costs. I've counted the price in innocent blood and found it too high to pay. You've grown weak, the demon snarled, rising to its full height. The humans have poisoned your mind with their pathetic morality, but I can fix that. I can remind you what you really are. It lunged at him with claws extended, moving fast enough to blur, but Naruto was faster. His hand shot out, catching the demon by the throat mid-leap. For a moment, just a moment, his appearance flickered, blonde hair darkening, clothes shifting to black armor, demon mark blazing across his forehead like a brand. You want to see what I really am? His voice carried harmonics that spoke of power beyond mortal comprehension. Fine, the demon's eyes widened in terror as Naruto's grip tightened. But instead of the killing blow it expected, something else happened. Light erupted from Naruto's hand, not the harsh illumination of destructive magic, but something warm and pure. The demon's scream of pain transformed into something else entirely as the light washed through it, burning away the corruption that had twisted its form. When the light faded, Naruto was holding not a monster but a man middle-aged, confused, but undeniably human. What? The man stammered, looking at his own hands in wonder. What did you do to me? Gave you back your choice, Naruto said, releasing him. You were human once, before the demon realm's corruption took hold. Now you can decide what you want to be. The man staggered away, still staring at his restored humanity. But how? Demon corruption can't be reversed, it's impossible. A lot of things are impossible, Naruto said tiredly. Until they're not. He turned to examine the shrine, looking for any other demons that might be lurking. But the clearing was empty except for the debris of the caravan and the man he'd just healed. When was the last time he'd used his power to heal instead of destroy? The answer came with another flood of memories, Elizabeth's face, peaceful in sleep as he used his magic to ease her pain. His hands gentle as he tended wounds that should have been fatal. The way she'd looked at him afterward, like he was something more than the monster everyone believed him to be. She saw who I could be, not just who I was. My lord, the man's voice was hesitant. What should I do now? I don't remember much about my life before I became that thing. Naruto considered the question. The old him, the Demon King, would have either killed the man or commanded his service. But the old him was gone, buried beneath 16 years of learning to care about others. Live, he said simply. Find a place where you can be happy, make connections with people who matter to you, and try to leave the world a little better than you found it. That's it. That's everything. The man nodded slowly, then bowed deeply before walking away into the forest. Naruto watched him go, wondering if he'd made the right choice. The pragmatic part of his mind, the part that remembered being a king, said he should have gotten more information about other demons in the area. But the human part of him, the part that was still Naruto Uzumaki, was satisfied with saving a life instead of taking one. He was just beginning to clean up the scattered goods from the caravan when he felt a familiar presence approaching. Multiple presences, actually, Kakashi and Jiraiya, moving fast and with purpose. They must have felt the power surge. He had maybe 30 seconds before they arrived. 30 seconds to figure out how to explain what had just happened. The truth, he decided, or at least part of it. They burst into the clearing in full combat mode, ready for a battle that was already over. Kakashi's Sharingan was active, scanning for threats, while Jiraiya had his hands positioned for summoning jutsu. Both of them stopped short when they saw Naruto standing calmly in the middle of the destruction. "Where's the demon?" Kakashi demanded. "Gone," Naruto said. Dealt with how?" Jiraiya's eyes narrowed as he took in the scene. "There's no body, no signs of a fight. Just a lot of residual energy that feels." He paused, searching for words. "Ancient, Because it is ancient. A new voice spoke from the edge of the clearing, and all three ninjas spun to face the speaker. The figure that emerged from the trees was tall and lean, with silver hair and eyes that held depths of knowledge that seemed impossible in such a young face. He wore clothes that didn't belong to any nation Naruto knew, and his presence radiated power that made even Jiraiya step back. "Who are you?" Kakashi's hand moved to his kunai pouch. The stranger smiled, and his gaze fixed on Naruto with unmistakable recognition. "Someone who's been waiting a very long time for this moment. Isn't that right, Meliodas?" Naruto felt the world tilt beneath his feet. "How do you know that name?" "Because I served you once long ago, before you chose love over power, before you walked away from your throne." The stranger stepped closer, apparently unconcerned by the three ninja who could kill him in seconds. "My name is Merlin, and I've been searching for you across multiple reincarnations." Merlin. The name triggered a flood of memories, the greatest sorceress of her age, member of the 7 deadly sins, the one person who'd understood the true scope of his power and the burden it represented. "You're supposed to be dead," Naruto said weakly. "So are you, technically," Merlin's smile widened. "But here we both are, defying death once again, though I must say this incarnation is particularly interesting. Uzumaki Naruto, Jinchuriki of the Nine-Tailed Fox, future Hokage of the Hidden Leaf Village." She paused. "And apparently still capable of purifying demon corruption with a touch. Some things never change." Kakashi and Jiraiya exchanged looks that promised a very long interrogation in Naruto's immediate future. "We need to talk," Jiraiya said grimly. "All of us, now." But Merlin shook her head. "Not yet. First, there's something young Meliodas needs to understand about his awakening. Something that will determine whether this reincarnation becomes humanity's salvation." Her expression darkened, and for a moment, Naruto saw genuine fear in her ancient eyes. "Or its final destruction." The clearing fell silent except for the wind through the trees and the distant sound of birds fleeing to safer skies. Naruto looked at the faces around him, his teachers confused and wary, this woman from his past carrying knowledge he wasn't sure he wanted. And underneath it all, the growing certainty that his life as Naruto Uzumaki, simple ninja with dreams of becoming Hokage, was over. Whatever came next, he would face it as both the boy who'd sworn to protect his village and the ancient king who'd once ruled through fear. He just hoped that combination wouldn't destroy everything he'd learned to love. The abandoned training ground Merlin led them to was older than Konoha itself, a circular clearing carved into bedrock, surrounded by stone pillars covered in symbols that hurt to look at directly. Naruto felt the familiar tingle of ancient magic as they crossed the threshold, like walking through invisible spider webs. "Privacy seals," Merlin explained, noticing his reaction. "Nothing said here will reach unwanted ears." Kakashi was the first to speak once they'd settled into an uneasy circle. "Before we go any further, I need to know exactly who I'm dealing with. You claim to know Naruto from a previous life, but that's impossible. Reincarnation doesn't work that way, doesn't it?" Merlin's smile was thin. "Tell me, Hatake Kakashi, what do you know about souls that refuse to rest? About love so strong it transcends death itself?" "Fairy tales," Jiraiya said bluntly. "Stories people tell themselves to feel better about loss." "Fairy tales," Merlin laughed, but there was no humor in it. 3,000 years ago, there was a war between the human, demon, and goddess realms. At its center stood a demon prince who fell in love with a goddess maiden, and their forbidden romance nearly destroyed everything. Naruto felt the memories stirring again, Elizabeth's face, countless deaths, the curse that bound them together. His hands clenched into fists. "The supreme deity and the demon king couldn't allow such a union," Merlin continued. "So they cursed the lovers. Elizabeth to be reborn as a human again and again, doomed to remember her past life just before dying. And Meliodas," she looked directly at Naruto, "cursed to watch her die repeatedly, his emotions sealed away to prevent his power from destroying the world in grief." "That's impossible," Kakashi said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Is it? Look at him, Kakashi, really look." All three men turned to study Naruto, and he felt exposed under their scrutiny. He knew what they were seeing, the way his posture had changed over the past few days, more rigid and controlled. The ancient weight in his eyes that had no business being there. The power that rolled off him in waves despite his attempts to suppress it. "The curse was supposed to be eternal," Merlin said, "but every system has flaws, every prison has a key. And sometimes, just sometimes, love finds a way." Naruto's voice cracked when he finally spoke. How many times did I watch her die?" 106, Merlin said gently. But this incarnation is different. You weren't supposed to remember this early. The awakening should have taken decades if it happened at all. Then why? Because you're not just Meliodas reborn, Merlin interrupted. You're something new. The Jinchuriki of the Nine Tails, raised with bonds of friendship and loyalty that Meliodas never had as a child. You've learned to care about people without possessing them, to protect without dominating. Jiraiya leaned forward. What are you saying? I'm saying this reincarnation might be strong enough to break the curse entirely, to choose love without losing himself to wrath. Merlin's expression grew serious. But only if he can integrate both sides of his nature without letting either one consume him. The words hung in the air like a challenge. Naruto felt something building in his chest, not the familiar warmth of his normal chakra, but something colder and infinitely more dangerous. And if I can't, he asked. Then the world will burn, a new voice said from nowhere and everywhere at once. Just like old times, Captain, everyone spun around but there was no one there. Just a faint shimmer in the air, like heat waves rising from summer pavement. Naruto's eyes widened. Ban! The shimmer solidified into the ghost-like outline of a tall man with white hair and a cocky grin. He wore the remnants of what had once been fine clothes, now tattered and faded. Most unsettling were his eyes, ancient and amused, and completely lacking in anything resembling sanity. Miss me? Ban's spirit asked, settling onto one of the stone pillars like it was a comfortable chair. Been waiting forever to talk to you again. Death is really boring, by the way. 0 bars, terrible company. Kakashi's hand went to his kunai again. What is that thing? Not a thing, Ban said cheerfully. A who? Ban, fox sin of greed, eternally devoted friend and occasional pain in the ass. He looked at Naruto with something that might have been fondness. Good to see you again, Captain, though I gotta say the new look is weird. You're so short. You're dead, Naruto said weakly. Very dead, has been for about 3,000 years now. But souls like ours don't just disappear, especially when we're tied to someone as stupidly powerful as you. Ban's grin widened. The whole gang's still around, actually. Just waiting for the right moment to pop in and give advice you probably won't take. Jiraiya was staring at the spirit with the expression of someone whose worldview was crumbling in real time. This is impossible. Spirits can't manifest without a summoning contract, or a connection strong enough to transcend death itself, Merlin finished. The 7 deadly sins were bound together by more than friendship. They shared a purpose, a guilt, and a loyalty that death couldn't break. 7 deadly sins, Kakashi's voice was sharp. Our group, Ban explained helpfully. 7 of the strongest knights in Britannia, each carrying the weight of a particular sin. Meliodas was our captain, and boy did we get into some spectacular trouble together. More memories flooded Naruto's mind, faces around a table, laughter that felt genuine for the first time in centuries, people who accepted his darkness and stood by him anyway. The first real friends he'd ever had. They're all, he couldn't finish the question, dead as doornails, Ban confirmed. But like I said, we stick around, perks of being legendary and all that. His expression grew more serious. The question is, what are you gonna do now that you remember who you are? It was the question Naruto had been avoiding. Now that he knew the truth, now that he remembered being the Demon King, what came next? I want to forget again, he said quietly. I want to go back to being just Naruto Uzumaki. I want to protect my village and become Hokage and live a normal life. Can't unring a bell, Captain, Ban said gently. The memories are back for good this time. Question is whether you're gonna let them drive you crazy or use them to become something better. Better, Naruto laughed, but it sounded broken. I was a monster, Ban. I killed thousands of people. I led armies of demons and reveled in the destruction. How is remembering that supposed to make me better? Because now you know the cost, Merlin said. The old Meliodas ruled through fear because he'd never learned any other way. But you have learned other ways. You know what it means to earn loyalty instead of commanding it. Kakashi stepped forward, his visible eye serious. Naruto, regardless of who you might have been in a past life, I know who you are now. You're the kid who refused to give up on Sasuke even when everyone else had written him off. You're the one who convinced Gaara that he didn't have to be alone. You've never been a monster. The words should have been comforting, but they only made the guilt worse. You don't understand. The things I did were done by someone else in a different time under different circumstances, Jiraiya interrupted. You can't take responsibility for every choice your soul has ever made. But they're my memories now, the words exploded out of him, and with them came a surge of power that made the ancient stone pillars crack. I can remember the taste of blood, the sound of people begging for mercy. I remember enjoying it. The demon mark blazed to life across his forehead, black flames that cast no light. His appearance flickered again, clothes shifting to dark armor, hair growing longer, eyes turning from blue to gold. "There he is," Ban said softly. "There's our captain." But instead of the controlled power Meliodas had once wielded, this felt wild and desperate. Naruto's emotions were too raw, too unprocessed. The magic responded to his pain by lashing out at everything around him. Trees at the edge of the clearing withered and died. The stone pillars cracked further, ancient symbols flaring and then going dark. Even the air felt poisoned, thick with the kind of malevolent energy that drove people insane. "Naruto," Kakashi shouted, but his voice seemed to come from very far away. "This is what you really are," a voice whispered in Naruto's mind, not Ban's voice, not Kurama's, but something else entirely. Something that sounded like his own voice aged by millennia of cruelty. "Stop pretending to be human. Embrace what you were born to be." Images flashed through his mind, himself sitting on a throne of bones, demons kneeling before him, the world burning while he watched with satisfaction. It felt so natural, so right. Why struggle against his nature when he could simply accept it? Because Elizabeth loved the man you could be, not the monster you were. The thought cut through the darkness like a blade. Elizabeth, who had seen past his sins to something worth saving. Elizabeth, who had chosen love over fear even when it meant dying again and again. Hinata, he realized. She's doing the same thing. She sees something in me worth protecting. The realization was like ice water on flames. The demon mark flickered and faded, his appearance shifted back to normal, and the destructive energy dissipated into harmless sparks. Naruto collapsed to his knees, shaking from the effort of pulling his power back under control. "Well," Ban said cheerfully, "that could have gone worse. Remember the time you leveled half of Camelot during a nightmare?" "Not helping," Merlin said dryly. Kakashi was at Naruto's side in an instant, one hand on his shoulder. "Are you back with us?" Naruto nodded, not trusting his voice. The emotional whiplash was overwhelming, from despair to rage to something that might have been hope, all in the span of minutes. "This is why the awakening is dangerous," Merlin explained to the others. 3,000 years of memories and emotions all hitting him at once. Most minds would simply shatter under the strain. "But mine didn't," Naruto said slowly. "Why? Because you're not just Meliodas," Ban said. "You're Naruto too, and that kid is stubborn enough to wrestle a dragon into submission if he thought it was the right thing to do." Jiraiya ran a hand through his hair. "So what now? Do we tell the Hokage, the council? How do you explain that one of our ninja is the reincarnation of an ancient demon king?" "You don't," Merlin said firmly. "At least not yet. Naruto needs time to integrate his memories and learn to control his power. If word gets out before he's ready," she didn't need to finish. Naruto could imagine the panic, the fear, the calls for his execution or exile. Everything he'd worked for would be destroyed by revelation of what he'd once been. "How much time?" Kakashi asked. "As long as it takes," Ban answered, "but not too long. Other things are stirring, drawn by his awakening. Demons who remember their old king, humans who still worship the legends, and worse things, things that want to use his power for their own ends." Naruto looked up at his teachers, seeing the worry and confusion in their faces. "I'm sorry for all of this, for dragging you into whatever I'm becoming." "Hey," Jiraiya said gruffly, "you think you're the first student I've had with a complicated past. At least you're not trying to destroy the world for artistic reasons." Despite everything, Naruto found himself smiling slightly. "Give me time." "That's the spirit," Ban laughed. "Nothing like a good apocalypse to bring people together." Merlin stood, brushing dust from her robes. "We'll need to meet regularly. Naruto has centuries of magical knowledge locked in his memories, but accessing it safely will require guidance." "And if something goes wrong?" Kakashi asked. Ban's spirit flickered, his outline becoming more solid for a moment. "Then the rest of us will step in. The sins don't abandon their captain, even in death." As if summoned by his words, other shapes began to materialize at the edges of the clearing. Vague outlines, indistinct but undeniably present. 6 figures standing guard, ready to offer counsel or restraint as needed. "My friends," Naruto thought, and for the first time since the memories returned, he felt something other than guilt. "They're still here." The meeting broke up with plans to reconvene in 3 days, giving Naruto time to process what he'd learned. As they walked back toward the village, Kakashi fell into step beside him. "For what it's worth," his teacher said quietly, "I don't think you're a monster. Monsters don't torture themselves over past sins. They don't risk everything to save people who might never thank them for it." "How can you be sure?" "Because I've met real monsters," Kakashi said simply. And they don't cry for the people they've killed. Naruto touched his cheek and was surprised to find it wet. When had he started crying? When you remembered that Elizabeth forgave you, he realized. Even knowing what you'd done, she still loved you. The thought was terrifying and wonderful in equal measure. If Elizabeth could forgive him, if his friends could accept his darkness, maybe there was hope after all. Maybe he could find a way to be both Naruto Uzumaki and Meliodas without losing either one. But first, he had to figure out how to live with the weight of 3,000 years worth of sins. One day at a time, he supposed. Just like everything else. Behind him, barely visible in the fading light, Ban's spirit gave him a cheerful wave before disappearing into whatever realm the dead called home. "See you around, Captain," his voice whispered on the wind. "Try not to destroy anything important while we're gone." Despite everything, Naruto found himself grinning. Some things, apparently, never changed. The nightmares started the same night Naruto's power erupted in the ancient training ground. Sasuke jolted awake in his narrow bed at Orochimaru's hideout, cold sweat making his shirt cling to his skin. But these weren't the usual dreams about Itachi or the massacre. These were something else entirely, visions of a silver-haired demon standing beside a throne, eyes cold as winter and twice as merciless. "You were always the more ruthless one, brother." The words echoed in Sasuke's mind, spoken in a voice that sounded almost like his own, but aged by centuries of cruelty. In the dream, he'd been wearing black armor and commanding legions of demons with casual authority. "Brother." Sasuke had no brothers except Itachi, he whispered to the empty room. But no, that wasn't right. The silver-haired demon in his dreams felt different, older, more connected to him than even his actual brother had been. Sasuke swung his legs out of bed and walked to the small mirror mounted on his wall. His reflection stared back, black hair, dark eyes, the curse mark dormant but visible on his neck. Normal, human, so why did he keep expecting to see silver hair and golden eyes? The Demon King returns and his faithful brother awakens as well. How poetic. Whose voice was that? It sounded like his own thoughts, but the words felt foreign, like someone else was speaking through him. A knock on his door interrupted his confusion. "Sasuke-kun," Kabuto's voice called from the other side. "Orochimaru-sama wants to see you. Something about unusual chakra signatures detected near Konoha." Sasuke pulled on a fresh shirt and headed for Orochimaru's chambers, pushing the strange dreams aside. Whatever was happening to him could wait. Power was what mattered, power to kill Itachi, power to restore his clan's honor. But as he walked through the hideout's corridors, he couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had changed in the world. The air itself felt different, charged with an energy that made his curse mark tingle with anticipation. Something's coming, he thought, something that will change everything. He was more right than he knew. 300 miles away in Konoha, Naruto was discovering that ancient demon kings apparently didn't need much sleep. He'd been lying in bed for hours, staring at the ceiling while memories from 3,000 years of existence played through his mind like a never-ending movie. Some were beautiful, quiet moments with Elizabeth, camaraderie with the other sins, the satisfaction of protecting innocent people. Others were nightmarish, cities burning, armies of demons carrying out his orders, the screams of people who died because of his wrath. How did I live with myself back then? The answer came with uncomfortable clarity. He hadn't. The old Meliodas had been emotionally dead inside, going through the motions of existence without really feeling anything. It wasn't until he'd met Elizabeth that he'd started to remember what it meant to be alive. And now I have to figure out how to be both. A familiar presence stirred in his mind, not the ancient voices of his past life, but Kurama's distinctive chakra signature. The fox had been unusually quiet since the awakening, and Naruto was starting to worry. "Kit," Kurama's voice rumbled through their mental connection. "We need to talk." Naruto closed his eyes and let his consciousness sink into the seal space. He found Kurama pacing behind the bars of his cage, tails lashing with agitation. "What's wrong?" Naruto asked. "What's wrong?" Kurama's laugh was bitter. "You're asking me what's wrong when you've got the power of an ancient demon king flowing through your system. When every instinct I have is screaming at me to submit to a superior predator." "I'm still me," Naruto said, but the words sounded hollow even to himself. "Are you? Because the chakra I'm feeling from you isn't human. It's older than I am, darker than anything I've ever encountered, and it's getting stronger." Kurama stopped pacing and fixed Naruto with his crimson eyes. "I've been alive for 1,000 years, Kit. I've seen empires rise and fall, watched humans develop jutsu that could level mountains. But what you're becoming, it scares me." The admission hit Naruto like a physical blow. Kurama, the nine-tailed fox, the most powerful of the tailed beasts, was afraid of him. "I won't hurt you," Naruto said quietly, "or anyone else. I'm in control. For now. But what happens when you lose that control? What happens when the Demon King decides the fox in your chest would make a useful servant?" Before Naruto could answer, both of them felt it. A disturbance in the real world, something supernatural and hostile approaching the village at high speed. "We'll finish this later," Naruto said, already pulling his consciousness back to his body. "Kit, wait." But Naruto was already moving, rolling out of bed and pulling on his clothes with practiced efficiency. Whatever was coming, it felt familiar in the worst possible way. He was halfway to his window when it hit, a wave of malevolent energy that made every nerve in his body scream danger. Not one supernatural threat, but dozens, all converging on Konoha from different directions. "They can sense me," he realized. "My awakening is drawing them here." He leaped from his window and raced across the rooftops, following the strongest chakra signature toward the village's eastern gate. Around him, he could see other ninja responding to the threat. Chenbu teams moving with silent efficiency, Chunin and Jonin taking defensive positions. But they had no idea what they were really facing. Naruto reached the eastern gate just as the first wave of attackers emerged from the forest. They looked human at first glance, but his enhanced senses could detect the corruption beneath their skin. Demons wearing human faces, their true nature hidden by illusion. "How many?" he asked Guy, who was coordinating the defense. "At least 30, approaching from multiple vectors," Guy replied, his usual enthusiasm tempered by the seriousness of the situation. "But there's something wrong with their chakra signatures. They feel old. Because they are." Naruto's voice carried an authority that made several nearby ninja turn to look at him. "These aren't rogue ninja. They're demons and they're here because of me." Before Guy could ask what he meant, the attack began in earnest. The disguised demons dropped their human illusions, revealing their true forms, creatures of shadow and flame, with claws that could tear through steel and eyes that glowed with hellfire. They moved with inhuman speed and coordination, clearly working together rather than as individual threats. Naruto watched the village's defenders engage the demons and felt his heart sink. The ninja were skilled, but they were fighting an enemy they didn't understand. Kunai and shuriken passed harmlessly through bodies made of shadow. Fire jutsu only made the creatures stronger. Even taijutsu was ineffective against opponents who felt no pain. "They're going to get slaughtered." The thought triggered something deep in his chest, not the cold calculation of the Demon King, but the protective instincts that had always driven Naruto Uzumaki. These people were his friends, his family, his responsibility. "I won't let them die because of what I am." Power erupted from him like a volcano, but this time he didn't try to control it. Instead, he shaped it, molded it into something that served his will rather than commanding it. The demon mark blazed to life across his forehead, but instead of the usual black flames, this time it burned with golden light. His appearance shifted, clothes becoming black armor decorated with silver accents, blonde hair darkening at the roots, eyes turning from blue to gold. But most dramatically, dark wings erupted from his back, each feather edged with light that hurt to look at directly. Assault mode. The name came to him unbidden, along with the knowledge of what he could do in this form. Unlimited magical power, enhanced speed and strength, and most importantly, the ability to command lesser demons through sheer force of will. He launched himself into the battle, moving so fast that most of the watching ninja couldn't track his movements. But instead of the destructive rampage they might have expected, his attacks were surgically precise. A demon lunging at Rock Lee found itself paralyzed mid-strike as Naruto's power wrapped around it like chains. Another creature preparing to ambush a group of Chunin suddenly froze, its head snapping around to stare at Naruto with something that might have been worship. "My king," it whispered in a voice like grinding stone, "you have returned to us." "I'm not your king," Naruto said, his voice carrying harmonics that spoke of power beyond mortal comprehension. "I'm their protector." He raised his hand, and golden light erupted from his palm, not the harsh illumination of destructive magic, but something warm and pure. The light washed over the demons like a tide, and their screams of pain transformed into something else entirely. When the light faded, the creatures were gone. Not destroyed, but transformed, their corruption burned away, leaving behind confused humans who looked around with eyes that held sanity for the first time in centuries. The battle was over in less than 5 minutes. Naruto landed in the center of the group, his wings folding against his back as he surveyed the aftermath. The village's defenders were staring at him with expressions that ranged from awe to terror, but no one seemed hurt. Good, no one died because of my mistakes. Naruto, Guy's voice was cautious. What exactly just happened here? Before Naruto could answer, another presence made itself known, not threatening this time, but ancient and amused. Well, assault mode on the first try. I'm impressed, Captain. King's spirit materialized beside him, translucent but clearly recognizable. The fairy looked exactly as Naruto remembered: orange hair, youthful face that hid ancient wisdom, and clothes that had seen better centuries. Several ninja reached for weapons, but Naruto held up a hand to stop them. He's a friend, he said. King, Grizzly Sin of Sloth, another member of my old team. Your old team? Tenten asked, her voice tight with confusion. It's complicated, Naruto said, feeling the understatement of several lifetimes. King's spirit drifted closer, studying Naruto's transformed appearance with interest. You're handling the power better than I expected. Most reincarnations would have leveled half the village by now. Most reincarnations didn't spend 16 years learning to care about other people, Naruto replied. True. But that's not why I'm here. King's expression grew serious. The demons you just purified, they were scouts. Someone sent them to test your abilities, to see how you'd respond to a threat against your new home. Who? We're not sure yet. But whoever it is knows who you really are, and they're gathering forces for something much bigger than a simple raid. The implications of that statement settled over the group like a cold fog. If these demons had been just the opening move, what was coming next? We need to report this to the Hokage, Guy said finally. Naruto nodded, already feeling his transformation beginning to fade. The wings dissolved into sparks of light, his hair returned to its normal blonde, and the armor shifted back to his usual orange tracksuit. But the power remained, flowing through his system like molten gold. And with it came the uncomfortable realization that this was only the beginning. As they headed back toward the village center, Naruto caught sight of his reflection in a shop window. For just a moment, he saw not his own face but someone else's: silver hair, golden eyes, and an expression of grim determination. Zeldris, the name came to him unbidden. My brother, he's awakening too. The thought should have been comforting, having family, even family from a past life, awakening to help face whatever was coming. But all Naruto felt was dread, because he remembered what had happened the last time he and Zeldris had stood on opposite sides of a conflict. The world had nearly ended. Don't worry about him yet, King's voice whispered in his mind. Worry about the choice you'll have to make soon, between the man you want to be and the king your power demands you become. What if I can't choose? What if I need to be both? Then heaven help us all, King said softly. Because the last time you tried to balance those two sides of yourself, it took 3,000 years to clean up the mess. The spirit faded, leaving Naruto alone with his thoughts and the growing certainty that the hardest battles were still ahead. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rolled across a cloudless sky, and the air itself seemed to hold its breath. The awakening was far from over. The meeting with the Hokage had gone about as well as Naruto expected, which was to say, it had been a complete disaster. Tsunade had listened to their report with growing alarm, her face cycling through disbelief, anger, and something that might have been panic. When Guy described Naruto's transformation and the way he'd commanded the demons, she'd gone very still. So you're telling me, she'd said in a voice like grinding glass, that one of my ninja is the reincarnation of an ancient demon king, complete with wings and the ability to purify corruption with a touch. That's an accurate summary, yes, Kakashi had replied. The paperweight Tsunade threw had left a crater in the wall behind Naruto's head. Now, 3 hours later, Naruto found himself confined to his apartment while the council debated whether he was a threat to village security. House arrest, they called it, for his own protection and everyone else's. Right, because hiding from the problem always works so well. He was staring out his window at the AA Chenbu guards positioned on nearby rooftops when a soft knock came at his door. Not the sharp, authoritative knock of official business, but something gentler. Come in, he called, assuming it was Kakashi or maybe Jiroya with an update. Instead, Hinata stepped through the door, carrying a thermos and what looked like homemade cookies wrapped in cloth. Hinata, he scrambled to his feet. How did you get past the guards? A slight smile tugged at the corners of her mouth. You're not the only one who's gotten better at stealth techniques. She set the food on his small kitchen table and turned to study his face. Her pale eyes were serious, taking in details he probably didn't even realize he was showing. You look tired, she said simply. Haven't been sleeping much, the understatement of several lifetimes. Because of the memories, the question caught him off guard. How did you? I was there when the demons attacked. I saw your transformation. Hinata moved closer, her presence somehow calming despite everything that had happened. And I felt the power you used to save them. It was ancient Naruto-kun, older than anything I've ever sensed before. He slumped back into his chair, suddenly exhausted. So you know. About what I am. I know you saved 30 people today without hurting a single one of the creatures attacking us. I know you could have destroyed those demons completely, but chose to heal them instead. She sat across from him, her hands folded in her lap. That tells me more about who you are than any past life memories could. The simple acceptance in her voice made his chest ache. You don't understand, Hinata. The things I did in my past life. I was a monster. I killed thousands of people. I ruled through fear and enjoyed the power it gave me. Were you alone? The question was so unexpected that he looked up sharply. What? In those memories, when you were doing terrible things, were you alone? Did you have people who cared about you? People you were trying to protect? Images flashed through his mind, Meliodas in his early years, raised in the demon realm where strength was the only currency that mattered. Trained from childhood to see humans as livestock, demons as expendable resources, emotions as weaknesses to be purged. I was, he admitted quietly, completely alone. Until I met Elizabeth. Hinata nodded like that confirmed something important. The woman from your dreams, tell me about her. So he did. Sitting in his small apartment with AA Chenbu guards outside and the council probably deciding his fate, Naruto found himself talking about Elizabeth. Their first meeting. The way she'd looked past his demon heritage to see something worth saving. The quiet moments between battles that had taught him what love really meant. She sounds like she was very brave, Hinata said when he finished. Brave and foolish in equal measure. She kept believing I could be better than I was, even when I gave her every reason to think otherwise. And did you? Become better? Naruto considered the question. I tried. For her, I tried to be the kind of man who deserved her faith. But every time I started to make progress, she'd die and I'd lose control again. The curse was designed that way, a new voice said from the corner of the room. To keep you trapped in a cycle of growth and destruction, never quite achieving redemption. Both Naruto and Hinata turned toward the speaker. A woman materialized from thin air, tall and curvaceous, with long brown hair tied in twin tails and wearing a dancer's outfit that had seen better centuries. Diane, Naruto stood up so fast he nearly knocked over his chair. What are you doing here? The spirit of Diane, serpent sin of envy, grinned and struck a pose. Can't let Ban have all the fun of giving terrible advice. Besides, I wanted to meet the girl who's got you all twisted up inside. She looked at Hinata with undisguised curiosity. So you're the one, huh? The one who's supposed to break the cycle. I'm sorry, Hinata said politely, but who exactly are you? Diane, one of Captain's old teammates. Also dead, which is surprisingly inconvenient for giving hugs. Diane's expression grew more serious as she studied Hinata. You remind me of her, you know, not in looks, but in the way you see past the scary stuff to what's underneath. Elizabeth? Hinata asked. The one and only. Though between you and me, I always thought Captain could have handled things better if he'd actually talked to her about his problems instead of brooding dramatically in corners. I did not brood dramatically, Naruto protested. Captain, you once stood on a cliff for 3 hours staring meaningfully into the distance because Elizabeth smiled at someone else. Despite everything, Naruto felt a smile tugging at his lips. That was different. He was obviously trying to court her. He was asking for directions to the market. Hinata looked between them with growing amusement. You're both exactly like I imagined you'd be. Both, Diane tilted her head. Oh, you mean you can see the overlap? That's interesting. Overlap? Naruto asked. Hinata stood and moved to stand directly in front of him, close enough that he could smell lavender in her hair. You're not just Meliodas, Naruto-kun, and you're not just Naruto either. You're both blended together into something new. She reached up and touched his cheek gently, and for a moment he saw something in her eyes that made his breath catch. When I look at you, I see the boy who refused to give up on Sasuke even when everyone said it was hopeless. But I also see someone who's carried the weight of impossible choices for lifetimes. Both of those people are you. Smart girl, Diane said approvingly. Elizabeth used to say something similar, that loving someone meant accepting all their pieces, even the ones that didn't fit together perfectly. Images flashed through Naruto's mind, Elizabeth tending his wounds after a particularly brutal battle, her hands gentle despite the blood on his armor. Elizabeth talking him through a panic attack in the middle of the night, her voice patient even though his nightmares had woken her for the 3rd time that week. She never asked me to change, he said softly. She just believed I could be better, even when I couldn't see it myself. Because love isn't about changing someone, Hinata said, her hand still warm against his cheek. It's about giving them the strength to become who they're meant to be. The words hit him like a revelation. All this time, he'd been fighting against the memories of Meliodas, trying to suppress or ignore the power and knowledge that came with them. But what if that wasn't the answer? She gets it, Diane said, sounding pleased. Captain, you spent 3,000 years trying to be either completely human or completely demon. Maybe it's time to try being both. But how? The power that comes with those memories, it's dangerous. What if I lose control? What if I become the monster I used to be? Hinata's other hand came up to frame his face, forcing him to meet her eyes. Then I'll remind you who you really are, just like Elizabeth did. Just like your friends will. And if that doesn't work, Diane added cheerfully, we'll hit you with something heavy until you come to your senses. It's surprisingly effective. Despite everything, the house arrest, the council's suspicion, the growing certainty that something terrible was coming, Naruto found himself laughing. Real laughter, the kind that came from deep in his chest and made his shoulders shake. I missed this, he said when he could speak again. The team dynamics, the banter. Even when everything was falling apart, we could still make each other laugh. That's what family does, Diane said softly. We stick together, we keep each other grounded, and we don't let anyone face the darkness alone. Family, Naruto repeated, testing the word. Is that what we were? What we were and what we still are. Death doesn't change that, Captain. A comfortable silence settled over the room. Hinata was still standing close enough that he could feel the warmth radiating from her body, and her hands were still gentle against his face. It should have felt awkward, but instead it felt right. Hinata, he said quietly, there's something else, something I haven't told anyone. She waited, patient as always. I think my brother is awakening too. Not Naruto's brother Meliodas's, from the demon realm. He swallowed hard. His name was Zeldris, and the last time we fought each other, it nearly destroyed the world. Do you think he'll be hostile? I don't know, maybe. Probably. Naruto closed his eyes, remembering silver hair and cold golden eyes. He was always more dedicated to our father's cause than I was, if he remembers who he used to be. Then you'll deal with it when it happens, Diane said firmly. But don't borrow trouble, Captain. Focus on what you can control. Which is choosing who you want to be, Hinata said. Every day, every moment, the memories of your past don't have to define your future. She leaned closer, and for a moment he thought she might kiss him. Instead, she rested her forehead against his, her pale eyes serious and kind. I don't care if you're the reincarnation of a demon king, she whispered. I don't care if you have the power to level mountains or command armies. You're still the person who saved me from loneliness, who showed me that I was worth believing in. Hinata, I believe in you, Naruto-kun, all of you, the boy who dreams of being Hokage and the ancient king who's learning to love instead of conquer. Both sides deserve to exist, and both sides have something to offer. Well, Diane said, wiping away what would have been tears if she'd had a physical form, I think my work here is done. Try not to do anything stupidly heroic while I'm gone, Captain. No promises, Naruto said, but he was smiling. That's my boy. Diane's spirit began to fade. Oh, and Hinata, take care of him. He's more fragile than he looks. I will, Hinata promised. When Diane was gone, they remained standing close together, neither wanting to break the moment. Finally, Hinata pulled back enough to look into his eyes. Are you ready for whatever comes next? She asked. Naruto considered the question seriously. Was he ready to face other demons who might want to use his power, ready to confront a brother who might see him as a traitor to their heritage? Ready to balance the competing demands of his human heart and demon strength? No, he admitted, but I'm ready to try, and I won't face it alone. Never alone, Hinata agreed. Outside, storm clouds were gathering on the horizon, and the air itself seemed to vibrate with anticipation. Somewhere in the distance, something ancient and powerful was stirring, drawn by the echoes of awakened memories. But for now, in this small apartment with Chenbu guards outside and the future uncertain, Naruto felt something he hadn't experienced in either of his lifetimes. Peace. Not the peace of surrender or the peace of victory, but the peace that came from being truly known and accepted anyway. It was, he thought, what Elizabeth had always been trying to give him. And maybe, just maybe, it would be enough to break a 3,000-year-old curse. The storm was coming, but he wouldn't face it alone. That, more than any power or ancient knowledge, gave him hope. The mission should have been routine. Escort a group of merchants to the border, provide security during trade negotiations, and return to Konoha within a week. Simple, safe, the kind of assignment given to teams who needed to rebuild trust and coordination. Which was exactly why Tsunade had assigned it to Team 7. "This is stupid," Sasuke said for the 5th time that morning, his voice carrying the particular brand of irritation reserved for tasks beneath his perceived skill level. "We're basically glorified bodyguards." "It's called rebuilding team dynamics," Sakura replied, not looking up from the medical supplies she was organizing. "After everything that's happened, we need missions where we can focus on working together instead of," she cut herself off, but everyone knew what she'd been about to say. "Instead of dealing with whatever was happening to Naruto." It had been a week since the demon attack on the village, and the aftermath was still rippling through everyone's lives. The official story was that Naruto had manifested a new bloodline limit during the crisis, something that explained his enhanced abilities without mentioning ancient demon kings or reincarnation. Most people had bought it. After all, Naruto had always been full of surprises, but his teammates knew better. Sasuke kept shooting him suspicious glances, like he was waiting for Naruto to sprout wings again. Sakura was being carefully professional, the way she got when she was processing information that challenged her worldview. And Kakashi was watching all of them with the intensity of someone expecting everything to fall apart at any moment. "The merchants are decent people," Naruto said, trying to break the tension. "And the mission pays well. What's wrong with a little easy money?" Sasuke's dark eyes fixed on him with laser focus. "Nothing's been easy since you started having your mysterious power upgrades. Want to explain what that was about back at the village?" The question hung in the air like a blade. They'd been dancing around it for days, everyone pretending that Naruto growing wings and commanding demons was just another Tuesday in their lives. "It's complicated," Naruto said finally. "Everything's complicated with you," Sasuke shot back. "But some of us would still like an explanation that doesn't involve mystical bloodline limits appearing out of nowhere." Before Naruto could respond, their client, a nervous middle-aged man named Tanaka, came hurrying over from where he'd been checking his wagons. "Is everything ready?" he asked, wringing his hands. "The sooner we leave, the sooner we can get this over with." "We're ready," Kakashi said, his visible eye crinkling in what might have been a reassuring smile. "Though you seem unusually anxious for a routine trade mission." Tanaka's laugh was high-pitched and strained. "Routine? There's been talk of strange creatures in the forest, demons and monsters that hunt in broad daylight. Nothing's routine anymore. Demons." The word made something stir uneasily in Naruto's chest. His enhanced senses had been picking up traces of supernatural energy for the past few days, faint but persistent, like smoke from a distant fire. "What kind of creatures?" he asked. "Shadows that move wrong, voices that call your name from empty spaces." One of the other merchant caravans found their horses dead with no wounds on them, just empty. Like something had drained the life right out of them. Sasuke and Sakura exchanged glances. That didn't sound like any normal predator. "Well," Kakashi said cheerfully, "that's what we're here for. Shall we go?" The first few hours of travel passed without incident. The merchants' wagons rolled along the forest path at a steady pace, their guards alert but not alarmed. Team 7 spread out in their usual formation, Kakashi taking point, Sasuke and Sakura on the flanks, Naruto bringing up the rear. But something was wrong. The forest was too quiet. No birdsong, no rustle of small animals in the underbrush. Even the insects had gone silent. The only sounds were the creak of wagon wheels and the soft footsteps of the guards. Like everything's holding its breath, Naruto thought. His demon heritage was picking up traces of corruption in the air, faint but growing stronger as they traveled deeper into the woods. Whatever was out there, it was old and patient and very, very hungry. "Kakashi-sensei," he called softly. Their leader's hand came up in a subtle signal. "I know. Stay alert." But alert wasn't enough when the attack came from everywhere at once. The shadows beneath the trees suddenly deepened, becoming pools of liquid darkness that moved independently of any light source. From these pools emerged creatures that hurt to look at directly, beings made of hunger and malice, with too many eyes and teeth that gleamed like obsidian. The horses screamed and bolted, sending the merchant wagons careening off the path. Guards shouted orders that were lost in the chaos as the shadow creatures swarmed over them like a black tide. "Defensive positions," Kakashi shouted, but his voice was barely audible over the inhuman howling that filled the air. Sasuke's Chidori lit up the forest, crackling lightning illuminating the nightmare scene in stark detail. His attack tore through 3 of the creatures, but where they'd been destroyed, more shadows simply flowed in to take their place. Sakura was already moving, her enhanced strength sending broken trees flying as she carved a path toward the trapped merchants. But for every creature she destroyed, two more materialized from the darkness. These aren't normal demons, Naruto realized with growing horror. They're something else entirely. His enhanced senses were screaming warnings. These creatures weren't just hunting for food or territory. They were specifically targeting him, drawn by the power that flowed through his system. And they were winning. "There's too many of them," Sakura called, her voice tight with strain. She'd managed to reach two of the merchants, but more creatures were closing in from all sides. Sasuke activated his curse mark, letting Orochimaru's power flood through his system. The boost in strength and speed let him move faster, strike harder, but even that wasn't enough. For every creature he killed, the shadows birthed three more. They're not really dying, he realized. They're just reforming from the darkness itself. Kakashi had come to the same conclusion. "We need to retreat," he shouted. "Fall back to the clearing." But there was nowhere to fall back to. The creatures had surrounded them completely, cutting off every avenue of escape. And in the center of the swarm, something was taking shape, a figure made of pure shadow, tall as a tree and radiating power that made the air itself scream. "Young king," it spoke in a voice like grinding bones. "You have grown strong in your new flesh, but not strong enough to protect these mortals." The Shadow King raised one massive hand, and every creature in the forest froze. Then, moving with perfect synchronization, they all turned toward the trapped merchants. "Choose," the Shadow King continued. "Embrace your true nature and save them, or watch them die while you pretend to be human." Time seemed to slow as Naruto watched the creatures begin their final charge toward his friends and the innocent people they were supposed to protect. Sasuke and Sakura were fighting with everything they had, but they were overwhelmed. Kakashi was already injured, blood streaming from wounds that moved too fast to track. "I can't save them with normal techniques. I need more power." But using his demon abilities in front of Team 7 would shatter any pretense that this was just a bloodline limit. They'd know exactly what he was, and there would be no going back. "Tick-tock, young king. How many lives are you willing to sacrifice for your secret?" The shadow creatures were almost at the merchants now. Tanaka was screaming, his face white with terror as claws reached for his throat. Damn the consequences. Power erupted from Naruto like a nuclear explosion, dark and golden energy mixing in ways that should have been impossible. The demon mark blazed across his forehead, and his appearance shifted dramatically. Black armor replacing his orange jumpsuit, wings of shadow and light bursting from his shoulders, eyes burning with the authority of absolute rule. But this time was different. This time, he didn't just access his power, he became it. Demon King mode. The transformation was so complete that for a moment, Naruto Uzumaki ceased to exist. In his place stood Meliodas in all his terrible glory, radiating power that made reality itself bend around him. "Enough!" His voice shook the forest, and every shadow creature froze mid-attack. The Shadow King itself took a step backward, its massive form wavering like smoke. "You dare to threaten those under my protection? You dare to hunt in my presence?" Naruto, no, Meliodas raised his hand, and the air around them began to burn. Not with fire, but with pure energy that consumed corruption at its source. "I am Meliodas, the dragon's sin of wrath, captain of the 7 deadly sins and heir to the Demon King's throne. These people are mine to protect, and I will tolerate no threats against them." The shadow creatures tried to flee, but there was nowhere to run from power of this magnitude. The burning light expanded outward like a wave, washing over friend and foe alike. But instead of destruction, the light brought purification. The shadow creatures screamed as their corrupt essence was burned away, revealing the tortured souls beneath. Human souls, Naruto realized, twisted by dark magic but not truly evil. Just like the demons at the village. Someone's been collecting and corrupting innocent people. The revelation filled him with a rage so pure it felt like ice in his veins. Whoever was behind these attacks wasn't just targeting him, they were destroying lives to do it. "Show yourself," he commanded, his voice carrying harmonics that spoke of power beyond mortal comprehension. "I know you're watching. Come face the consequences of your actions." For a moment, nothing happened. Then the air itself seemed to tear, revealing a figure that made even the Shadow King look small by comparison. It was human-shaped but wrong in every detail. Too tall, too thin, with features that shifted like smoke and eyes that held the cold light of dying stars. When it spoke, its voice came from everywhere at once. "Hello, brother." The word hit Naruto like a physical blow. Zeldris, not the silver-haired boy he remembered from their childhood, but something else entirely. something that had been twisted by 3,000 years of hatred and isolation. You've grown soft, Zeldris continued, protecting humans, healing corruption instead of embracing it. Father would be ashamed. Father's dead, Naruto replied, and good riddance, his vision of the world was a nightmare. Was it? Look around, brother. Look at what humanity has become in our absence. Wars, hatred, endless cycles of revenge. Perhaps a firm hand is exactly what they need. Behind him, Naruto was dimly aware of his teammates staring at him in shock and growing fear. They were seeing him as he truly was, not just their friend with unusual powers, but an ancient being of immense destructive capability. This is what you were afraid of, a familiar voice said in his mind. Not one of the sins this time, but someone new. This is why you've been fighting the memories. A figure materialized beside him, a tall man with pink hair and unusual clothing, his face kind but serious. Gauther, the goat sin of lust, looked exactly as Naruto remembered. The identity crisis is fascinating, Gauther said in his characteristic monotone. You're experiencing what psychologists call dissociative integration disorder on a metaphysical level. Not now, Gauther. Actually, this is precisely when you need to hear this. You're suppressing parts of your identity because you fear they're incompatible, but that suppression is causing reality distortions around you. Even as Gauther spoke, Naruto could feel it, the way his uncontrolled power was warping the space around them. Trees growing backwards, gravity flowing in directions that shouldn't exist, time moving in stutters and loops. The memories and power aren't separate from who you are now, they're part of the same continuum. Accept them fully or risk losing both identities entirely. Zeldris raised a hand wreathed in darkness. Enough talk. If you won't embrace your heritage willingly, I'll force you to remember what you really are. The attack that followed was beyond anything Naruto had faced in either lifetime. Pure destruction given form, darkness that didn't just destroy but erased, removing things from existence so completely that even the memory of them vanished. And Naruto met it with everything he had. Not just the power of the Demon King, but the bonds he'd forged as Naruto Uzumaki. The determination to protect his friends, the love he'd learned from people who saw past his power to the person beneath, the hope that maybe, just maybe, he could be better than his predecessor. The collision of their powers tore a hole in reality itself. When the light faded and the world stopped screaming, Naruto found himself on his knees in the middle of a crater, his transformation gone and his strength completely spent. Around him, his teammates and the merchants stared at the devastation with expressions of awe and terror. Zeldris was gone, but his final words echoed in the sudden silence. This isn't over, brother. I'll make you remember what you truly are. Naruto, Sakura's voice was small and uncertain. What was that? He tried to answer, but the world was spinning and his vision was going gray at the edges. Using that much power had pushed him beyond his limits, and now his body was shutting down to protect itself. You did well, Gauther's spirit said, already beginning to fade, but this is only the beginning. The integration process will be difficult, and you'll need help from those who care about you. The last thing Naruto saw before consciousness left him was Kakashi kneeling beside him, visible eye-wide with concern and something that might have been understanding. Rest now, Gauther whispered. When you wake, the real work begins. And in the growing darkness of unconsciousness, Naruto finally understood what the spirit meant. The battle with Zeldris hadn't been the real fight. The real fight was accepting that he was both Naruto Uzumaki and Meliodas, and finding a way to be both without losing his soul to either one. But first, he had to survive the consequences of his team learning the truth. That might prove even harder than facing his brother. Naruto woke up in the hospital, which was becoming an unfortunate habit. The first thing he noticed was the complete silence in his room, not just quiet, but the kind of absolute stillness that came from soundproofing seals. The second thing he noticed was that his hands were restrained to the bed with chakra-suppressing cuffs. Well, that's not encouraging. You're awake. Kakashi's voice came from the corner of the room, where his teacher sat reading what looked like mission reports. How are you feeling? Like I got hit by a mountain. Also, why am I cuffed to the bed? Kakashi set down his papers and moved his chair closer. Because 3 days ago, you transformed into something that made reality bend around you, then proceeded to have a conversation with what appeared to be an interdimensional being who called you brother and threatened to remake the world. Right. That the council, Naruto asked, wants to seal you in a box and bury it somewhere safe. Tsunade's been fighting them, but Kakashi shrugged. Your secret's out, Naruto. Team 7 saw everything, the merchants have been talking, and word is spreading fast. Naruto closed his eyes, feeling the weight of inevitability settle on his chest. He'd known this day would come eventually, but he'd hoped for more time to figure out how to handle it. How bad is it? On a scale of 1 to village-ending crisis. About a 7, Kakashi pulled out a scroll and unrolled it on the bedside table. The official story is still holding for most people: advanced bloodline limit, family secrets, the usual explanations. But the people who matter know better. Sakura and Sasuke. Sakura's been reading every book on reincarnation and ancient history she can get her hands on. Sasuke, Kakashi paused. Sasuke disappeared 2 days ago, left Orochimaru's hideout without a word and hasn't been seen since. Something cold settled in Naruto's stomach. He's coming here. That's what we think. The question is whether he's coming as a friend or an enemy. Before Naruto could respond, the air in the room shimmered like heat waves, and a familiar figure began to materialize. Not one of the Sins this time, but someone else, tall and elegant, with silver hair and eyes that held depths of knowledge. Merlin's spirit looked exactly as she had 3,000 years ago, down to the slightly amused expression she wore when contemplating complex magical theory. "Hello, Meliodas, you look terrible." "Thanks, really needed to hear that right now." Kakashi's visible eye widened as he took in the spirit's appearance. "I'm guessing this is another member of your old team." Merlin bore sin of gluttony, greatest sorceress of her age and generally insufferable know-it-all, Merlin said with obvious satisfaction. "And before you ask, yes, I have been watching this entire debacle unfold. Fascinating stuff, really." "Could you maybe be fascinated a little more quietly?" Naruto asked. "I'm pretty sure the last thing I need right now is more supernatural witnesses to my mental breakdown. On the contrary, what you need is someone to explain what's actually happening to you. Because despite what you think, this isn't a breakdown, it's integration." Merlin waved her hand, and suddenly the room was filled with floating diagrams that looked like cross-sections of reality itself. Mathematical equations hung in the air beside charts that mapped the flow of magical energy through impossible dimensions. Your soul carried forward the accumulated experiences and power of your previous incarnation, but they were compressed and sealed to prevent psychological damage. The awakening process is essentially a controlled decompression, allowing those memories and abilities to merge with your current identity. "Controlled?" Naruto laughed bitterly. "There's nothing controlled about this. I nearly destroyed my entire team 3 days ago." "No, you saved them. The power discharge was actually remarkably precise for someone experiencing dimensional integration syndrome." Merlin gestured to one of the floating charts. "Look at the energy patterns from your confrontation with Zeldris. Every attack was carefully calibrated to neutralize threats without causing collateral damage." Kakashi studied the incomprehensible diagrams with the expression of someone trying to understand a foreign language. "Are you saying Naruto was in control the entire time?" "I'm saying both sides of his nature were working in harmony, even if he didn't realize it. Meliodas provided the raw power and tactical knowledge, while Naruto provided the emotional grounding and protective instincts." "Then why does it feel like I'm losing my mind?" Naruto asked. "Because you're fighting the integration instead of accepting it. You keep trying to be either Naruto or Meliodas when what you need is to be both." Merlin's expression grew more serious. "The reason your power becomes unstable is because you're suppressing essential parts of your identity." She waved her hand again, and the diagrams shifted to show what looked like 2 overlapping circles, one blue, one gold, with a small area of overlap in the center. "This is you right now, 2 separate identities sharing the same soul space with minimal integration. It's exhausting and ultimately unsustainable." The diagram changed, showing the circles gradually merging into a single, more complex shape. "This is what you could become, a unified identity that incorporates the best aspects of both incarnations while transcending the limitations of either. And if I can't manage that, then the strain will eventually tear your soul apart and you'll cease to exist as either identity." Merlin said it casually, like she was discussing the weather. "But I have faith in you. You've always been remarkably adaptable." "Gee, thanks for the vote of confidence." Before Merlin could respond, alarms began blaring throughout the hospital. Red lights flashed in the corridors, and Naruto could hear the sound of ninja mobilizing for combat. Kakashi was on his feet instantly, hand moving to his weapon pouch. "What's happening?" The answer came in the form of an AA Chenbu operative who burst through the door without bothering to knock. "Kakashi-sen, you're needed immediately. There's been an incident at the main gate." "What kind of incident?" "Uchiha Sasuke has returned to the village. He's demanding to speak with Naruto and he's..." The AA Chenbu operative struggled for words. He's not entirely human anymore. Oh shit, Naruto struggled against his restraints. Let me up, I need to talk to him. Absolutely not, Kakashi said firmly. You're barely conscious, and if what happened 3 days ago is any indication, if I don't talk to him, people are going to die. Naruto met his teacher's eyes. Kakashi-sensei, I know what's happening to him. He's going through the same awakening I did, but without any support or guidance. Zeldris memories, Merlin said grimly. And unlike your integration, his will be focused entirely on power and conquest. He won't have the emotional foundation you built as Naruto to keep him grounded. The implications of that statement hit everyone in the room like a physical blow. If Sasuke was channeling Zeldris, the executioner, the Demon King's most loyal son, without any of Naruto's hard-won empathy and protective instincts. Get these cuffs off me, Naruto said. Now, Kakashi hesitated for a moment, then pulled out a key. If you lose control, I won't. Naruto flexed his hands as the restraints fell away, feeling power flow back through his system. Merlin, can you maintain a connection while I'm dealing with this? Of course. Though I should warn you, direct contact with another awakened reincarnation will accelerate your own integration process. You may experience some disorientation. Can't be worse than what I'm already dealing with. Famous last words, Merlin said cheerfully. They made their way through the hospital corridors at a run, past medical staff who were evacuating patients to the lower levels. Whatever was happening at the main gate, it was serious enough to trigger full emergency protocols. They emerged into chaos. The main plaza in front of the village gates looked like a war zone. Cracked pavement, overturned market stalls, and scorch marks that still smoked in the afternoon air. In the center of the destruction stood Sasuke, but it wasn't the Sasuke that Naruto remembered. He was taller, his hair longer and streaked with silver. His clothes had been replaced by dark armor that seemed to absorb light, and his eyes burned with golden fire. Most dramatically, dark wings spread from his shoulders, not the shadow and light combination Naruto had manifested, but pure darkness that hurt to look at directly. Around him, a dozen AA Chenbu operatives lay unconscious but breathing. He'd taken them down without killing them, which was probably the only reason the entire village wasn't mobilizing for war. "Hello, brother," Sasuke said, his voice carrying harmonics that spoke of ancient authority. "We need to talk." Not Sasuke, Naruto realized. This is Zeldris wearing Sasuke's face. "Let him go," Naruto said, stepping forward despite Kakashi's restraining hand on his shoulder. "Zeldris, release him and face me directly." Sasuke's, Zeldris's, golden eyes narrowed. "Release him." "There is no him anymore, Meliodas. There is only what we have always been, brothers bound by blood and purpose." "That's not true. Sasuke is still in there, fighting you." "Is he?" Zeldris raised his hand and dark energy swirled around his fingers. "Tell me, brother, when you access our father's power, do you still pretend to be the weak human child? Or do you accept the truth of what you are?" The question hit closer to home than Naruto wanted to admit. When he transformed to fight the shadow creatures, how much of his actions had been Naruto's and how much had been Meliodas taking control? "Don't let him get in your head," Merlin's voice whispered in his mind. "The integration process is different for everyone. Sasuke's awakening is being driven by trauma and isolation, while yours has been guided by bonds of friendship and love." "You're wrong," Naruto said aloud. "We're not the same people we were 3,000 years ago. We've learned, we've grown, we've become something more than just our father's legacy." "Have we?" Zeldris launched himself forward, moving so fast he was barely a blur. "Then prove it." The attack came without warning, not the precise strikes of a ninja, but the overwhelming assault of someone who had commanded armies and conquered kingdoms. Naruto barely managed to dodge, feeling the wind from Zeldris's claws ruffle his hair. But dodging wasn't enough. Zeldris pressed his advantage, forcing Naruto back with a combination of speed, strength, and magical techniques that shouldn't have been possible with a human body. "I need to transform, I can't match him like this." But the moment he reached for his demon power, he felt something else stirring, not Meliodas' memories, but Kurama's familiar chakra. "Kit," the fox's voice rumbled in his mind, "you don't need to become that thing to win this fight. You've got power of your own. But it's not enough. It's not about the amount of power. It's about how you use it." Kurama's presence grew stronger, more supportive than it had been in weeks. "Show him what you've learned that he hasn't." Understanding flooded through Naruto like lightning. Zeldris was fighting like the executioner, overwhelming force, ruthless efficiency, power without restraint. But that wasn't the only way to use their heritage. Instead of reaching for Meliodas' full power, Naruto drew on both sides of his nature, ninja techniques enhanced by demonic energy, human ingenuity guided by ancient knowledge. He created shadow clones infused with magical power, used Rasengan variants that incorporated demon magic, moved with the unpredictable style that had always been his trademark. The change in tactics caught Zeldris off guard. He'd been expecting either full submission or full transformation, not this hybrid approach that drew strength from both identities. "What are you doing?" Zeldris demanded, his attacks becoming more frantic as Naruto's unconventional style began to find openings in his defense. "Something you never learned," Naruto replied, landing a chakra-enhanced punch that sent his opponent staggering. "I'm being myself." For just a moment, something flickered in Zeldris's golden eyes, a flash of confusion that looked more like Sasuke than the ancient demon prince. "He's still in there, fighting for control." "Sasuke," Naruto called out, "I know you can hear me, you don't have to let him take over." "Sasuke is weak," Zeldris snarled, but his voice carried a note of uncertainty. "He failed to gain the power he needed, failed to avenge his clan, failed to— He's my friend," Naruto's voice cracked with emotion. "He's stubborn and prideful and impossible, but he's also loyal and brave and worth saving. Just like you were," the words hit Zeldris like a physical blow. His attack faltered, and for a moment his appearance flickered, silver hair shifting back to black, golden eyes fading to familiar dark orbs. "Naruto," Sasuke's voice, confused and frightened, "what's happening to me?" But before Naruto could respond, Zeldris reasserted control. "Sentiment makes you weak, brother. Just as it always has." He raised his hand, preparing what looked like a finishing blow, but instead of the overwhelming darkness Naruto expected, something else happened. The attack never came. Zeldris stood frozen, his hand trembling with the effort of holding back his own power. On his face was an expression of shock and something that might have been hope. "I can't," he whispered. "I can't hurt him." "Love's final victory," Merlin's voice said softly in Naruto's mind. Even corrupted by 3,000 years of isolation, the bond between brothers runs deeper than hatred. The dark wings faded from Sasuke's shoulders, the armor shifted back to his normal clothes, and he collapsed to his knees in the middle of the destroyed plaza. "I remember," he said, his voice raw with emotion. "I remember all of it, what we were, what I did in your name, the war that nearly destroyed everything." He looked up at Naruto with eyes that held depths of ancient pain. "How do you live with it?" Naruto knelt beside his teammate, his brother, and placed a hand on his shoulder. "One day at a time, with help from people who believe you can be better than you were." "I don't know if I can. The memories, the power, the things Zeldris wants me to do." Sasuke's hands were shaking. "It feels like I'm drowning in someone else's hatred." "Then we'll figure it out together," Naruto said simply. "Just like we always do." Around them, the village guards were beginning to approach cautiously. The immediate crisis was over, but Naruto knew this was just the beginning. Two reincarnated demon princes, both struggling with integration, both carrying the power to level cities if they lost control. "Well," Merlin said, her spirit materializing beside them, "this should be interesting. Two subjects for the integration process, each providing data points for the other's development. Could you maybe sound a little less excited about our existential crisis?" Naruto asked. "Where's the fun in that? Despite everything, the destroyed plaza, the confused memories, the growing certainty that this was only the beginning of their troubles, both Naruto and Sasuke found themselves smiling. Some things, apparently, never changed, even when you were ancient demon princes trying to figure out how to be human. 2 weeks after Sasuke's return, Naruto was beginning to understand why ancient demon kings had servants to handle the paperwork. "Incident Report 17, Shizune said, setting another scroll on the ever-growing pile in front of him. "Accidental reality distortion during meditation practice. The training ground is now experiencing time dilation effects. How bad? 1 hour inside equals 3 minutes outside. On the plus side, it's become incredibly popular with academy students cramming for exams." Naruto rubbed his temples, feeling a headache building behind his eyes. "And Incident Report 18, Chakra resonance with the village's barrier seals. They're now powered by ambient demon magic instead of conventional techniques. More efficient, but Jiraiya is having conniptions about the theoretical implications." This was his life now: endless meetings, constant monitoring, and a growing pile of supernatural incidents that all traced back to his unstable power. Being the reincarnation of an ancient demon king was turning out to be significantly more bureaucratic than he'd expected. "Where's Sasuke?" he asked. "Therapy session with Inoichi." Still working through 3,000 years of repressed fraternal issues, apparently. That made Naruto smile despite everything. The village's head of intelligence had taken one look at Sasuke's integration problems and declared it the most fascinating case study he'd ever encountered. Unfortunately, fascinating didn't translate to easy solutions. Any word from the council? Shizune's expression grew more serious. They want to see both of you tomorrow. There's been developments? Before Naruto could ask what kind of developments, the air in the room shimmered with heat waves. But instead of the familiar presences of his old teammates, something else was taking shape, massive, radiant, and carrying the unmistakable aura of absolute confidence. The spirit that materialized dwarfed everyone else who had appeared so far. Tall as a giant, with muscles that looked carved from marble and a mustache that belonged in legends. When he spoke, his voice carried the warmth of summer noon and the authority of the sun itself. Who decided to start the reunion without me? Eskener's spirit boomed, striking a pose that somehow made the entire room feel smaller. I am shocked that such a slight could occur. Naruto couldn't help grinning. Hello, Eskener. Captain, you look. Eskener paused, studying Naruto's appearance with the intensity of someone appraising a work of art. Different. More integrated, though still lacking the magnificent presence that true confidence provides. Shizune had gone very still, her medical training warring with the impossibility of what she was seeing. That's another one of your old teammates. Eskener, lion sin of pride, wielder of the power of sunshine and possessor of the most magnificent mustache in all the realms, Eskener announced with characteristic modesty. Also, apparently the only one with enough sense to address young Meliodas' current predicament. Which predicament? Naruto asked. I've got several running at the moment. The one where you're treating your power like a shameful secret instead of the magnificent gift it truly is. Eskener's expression grew more serious, though his voice retained its theatrical flair. You're holding back, Captain, not from lack of strength, but from lack of confidence in your own worthiness. The observation hit uncomfortably close to home. Ever since the integration had begun, Naruto had been walking on eggshells around his own abilities, using just enough power to handle immediate threats, but never fully embracing what he was capable of. I'm being careful, he said. The last time I went all out, I nearly tore a hole in reality. And you saved everyone in the process, Eskener's voice boomed with approval. But more importantly, you chose to save them instead of dominating them. That choice, Captain, is what separates earned confidence from destructive arrogance. Before Naruto could respond, the office door opened and Sasuke walked in, looking like he'd been put through an emotional meat grinder. His session with Inoichi always left him drained and irritable. More supernatural therapy? He asked, taking in Eskener's imposing presence. Let me guess, another dead teammate with helpful advice about embracing our inner demons. Sasuke Uchiha, I presume. Also known as Zeldris, the Executioner, second prince of the demon realm. Eskener studied him with obvious interest. You look like someone who's forgotten what it means to take pride in his own strength. Pride? Sasuke laughed bitterly. My strength comes from memories of genocide and conquest. What exactly should I be proud of? Nothing, if you insist on defining yourself by your worst moments. Eskener's tone shifted, becoming less theatrical and more genuinely wise. But that same strength also protected the innocent, served justice, and stood as a bulwark against chaos. Pride, young prince, is about choosing which aspects of yourself to celebrate. Naruto watched his friend, his brother, struggle with the concept. Sasuke's awakening had been rougher than his own, partly because Zeldris's memories were more focused on duty and service to their father's vision. It was harder to find the noble aspects when most of your recalled experiences involved following orders to destroy. Show me, Sasuke said quietly. If there's something worth being proud of in these memories, show me what you see. Eskener's smile was radiant. Gladly, he gestured, and suddenly the office was filled with images, not the floating diagrams Merlin favored, but vivid scenes that played out like movies in the air around them. They saw Zeldris standing between a group of human refugees and a pack of wild demons, his power creating a barrier that nothing could cross. They saw him training younger demon knights with patience and precision, teaching them to use their strength to protect rather than destroy. They saw him defying direct orders from the Demon King when those orders would have resulted in unnecessary civilian casualties. I remember that, Sasuke said softly, pointing to one of the scenes. The refugee camp. I held that barrier for 3 days straight, barely sleeping, because moving would have exposed them to attack. And why did you do it? Eskener asked. What drove you to exhaust yourself for the sake of strangers? Sasuke was quiet for a long moment. Because it was right, because someone had to, and I had the power to make a difference. Exactly, that impulse, that desire to use your strength in service of justice, that is what you should take pride in. Not the orders you followed, but the choices you made when no one was watching. More images flowed around them, these showing Meliodas during his time as captain of the Ten Commandments. But instead of the destructive scenes Naruto expected, these focused on moments of leadership, protection, and mercy. Times when he'd used his authority to shield the weak rather than crush them. "I'd forgotten," Naruto said, watching a younger version of himself defy their father's orders to spare a human village. "There were good moments too, weren't there? More than you remember, Captain. The guilt over your worst actions has overshadowed the pride you should feel in your best ones." Eskener's expression grew gentle. "But that's human nature, we remember our failures more clearly than our successes." "So what do we do about it?" Sasuke asked. "How do we integrate these memories without losing ourselves to either the guilt or the power? By choosing, deliberately and consciously, who you want to be going forward." Eskener struck another pose, this one somehow conveying both strength and humility. "Pride is not about believing you're perfect, it's about believing you're worth improving." The words resonated through the room like a bell, and Naruto felt something shift inside him. Not the dramatic transformation of his earlier awakenings, but something quieter and more fundamental. For weeks, he'd been treating his demon heritage like a dangerous animal that needed to be constantly restrained. But what if it was actually a tool, powerful and potentially destructive, but ultimately neutral until directed by his will? "I want to try something," he said, standing up from his desk. "Naruto," Shizune started, clearly alarmed. "Nothing dramatic," he assured her. "Just integration, real integration, not this constant internal warfare I've been waging." He closed his eyes and reached inward, not fighting the memories of Meliodas but embracing them. The power that flowed through his system, the knowledge accumulated over millennia, the tactical instincts honed through countless battles, all of it was his. Part of who he was, not something separate to be contained. But guided by who I choose to be now. When he opened his eyes, the change was subtle but unmistakable. His posture was straighter, carrying the unconscious authority of someone used to command. His voice was calmer, more measured. But most importantly, the constant tension he'd been carrying for weeks was gone. "How do you feel?" Sasuke asked. "Like myself," Naruto said and meant it. "All of myself for the first time since this started." "Magnificent," Eskener boomed. "And now, young prince, your turn." Sasuke looked uncertain. "I don't know if I can." "You can," Naruto said firmly. "Because you're not doing it alone this time." It was messier for Sasuke, probably because Zeldris's memories were more rigid and focused on hierarchy and duty. But with Naruto's support and Eskener's guidance, he managed to find his own balance, accepting the power and knowledge while choosing his own path forward. When it was done, both brothers looked complete, not transformed in any dramatic way, but integrated in a way that felt natural and sustainable. "Pride," Eskener said with satisfaction. "Not in what you were, but in what you've chosen to become." "So what now?" Shizune asked, her medical training clearly fascinated by the transformation she'd just witnessed. "Now we prepare for whatever's coming," Naruto said. "Because something is. I can feel it building, other powers stirring, drawn by our awakenings." Sasuke nodded grimly. "The council meeting tomorrow isn't just about monitoring us anymore, is it?" "No," Naruto admitted. "I think it's about deciding whether we're assets or threats, and depending on that decision." He didn't need to finish the thought. They all understood the implications. "Whatever comes next," Eskener said, beginning to fade as his time manifested ran out, "remember this feeling. Remember that you are worthy of the power you carry, and that power is only as good or evil as the choices you make with it." As the spirit disappeared, Naruto and Sasuke exchanged looks that spoke of shared understanding. For the first time since their awakenings began, they felt like themselves. Not fragmented beings struggling with competing identities, but complete people who happen to carry the memories of ancient power. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new decisions, and probably new crises. But they would face them as themselves, with confidence earned through struggle and pride tempered by wisdom. "We're ready," Naruto thought. "Whatever comes next, we're finally ready for it." Outside, storm clouds were gathering on the horizon, and the air itself seemed to vibrate with anticipation. The final test was coming. But for the first time in weeks, Naruto was looking forward to it. The council chamber had never felt more like a tribunal. Naruto and Sasuke sat at a table in the center of the room, while the village's leadership arranged themselves in a semicircle around them. Tsunade looked like she hadn't slept in days. The council elders wore expressions that ranged from nervous to openly hostile. Even Jiraiya seemed tense, his usual casual demeanor replaced by the alert watchfulness of someone expecting trouble. "Let's get straight to the point," Tsunade said, her voice cutting through the thick atmosphere. "Our intelligence network has been picking up chatter for the past week. Other villages are asking questions about the energy signatures detected near Konoha. Some are expressing concern." "Concern?" Naruto asked, though he suspected he knew where this was heading. "The kind of concern that leads to preemptive strikes," Danzo said from his position at the far end of the semicircle. "Two individuals with the power to level cities, carrying the memories of beings who once waged war against entire realms. Some might consider that an unacceptable threat." Sasuke's hand tightened on the armrest of his chair, but his voice remained calm. "And what do you consider it?" "That depends," Tsunade replied, "on what you intend to do with that power." Before either of them could answer, the temperature in the room dropped by 20 degrees. Not gradually, but all at once, like someone had opened a door to the Arctic. Ice crystals began forming on the windows, and everyone's breath became visible in sudden puffs of vapor. How touching. A family reunion. The voice came from everywhere and nowhere, speaking directly into their minds rather than through their ears. It carried the weight of absolute authority, the kind of presence that made entire armies kneel without thinking. Naruto was on his feet instantly, power flowing through his system like molten gold. Beside him, Sasuke rose with equal speed, dark energy crackling around his fingers. "Everyone out," Naruto said, his voice carrying harmonics that brooked no argument. "Now, we're not leaving you two," Tsunade started. "Gyo." The word hit the room like a physical force, sending papers flying and cracking the stone walls. Every human in the chamber felt the overwhelming urge to flee, their survival instincts screaming warnings about predators too dangerous to comprehend. They ran. Only when the last council member had cleared the building did the true presence reveal itself. The air in the center of the chamber began to tear, reality peeling back like old paint to reveal something that existed beyond the normal rules of physics. What emerged defied description, sometimes appearing as a figure in dark robes, sometimes as a writhing mass of shadow and flame, sometimes as nothing more than a pair of golden eyes that held the cold light of dying stars. "My sons," it said, and the words carried the weight of 3,000 years of frustrated ambition. "How long I have waited for this moment." "You're supposed to be dead," Sasuke said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Death, I am the Demon King. I am the concept of rule given form, the idea of power made manifest. Such things do not simply cease to exist." The presence solidified somewhat, taking on the appearance of a tall figure in armor that seemed to absorb light. Its face was hidden behind a helm that shifted and writhed like living shadow, but its voice was unmistakably familiar. "I am what remains of our father's will, preserved in the spaces between worlds, fed by the fear and hatred that mortals generate so efficiently." A fragment, Naruto realized. "You're not the original Demon King, you're just a piece of him clinging to existence." "Just a piece," the entity laughed, and the sound made the building's foundations crack. "I am his ambition, his vision, his absolute certainty that power should flow from the strong to the weak. I am everything he truly was, distilled to its purest essence." More tears appeared in reality around the chamber as other presences began to manifest. Not the familiar spirits of the 7 deadly sins this time, but something else entirely, creatures of pure malice that hurt to look at directly. "For 3 millennia I have waited, gathering strength, preparing for the moment when my heirs would awaken and remember their true purpose. And now, at last, that moment has come. Our purpose," Sasuke's voice was dangerous quiet. "We chose our own purpose. Did you? Then explain why you both carry my power, why my memories flow through your veins like blood. You are not separate beings who happen to remember past lives. You are fragments of me, sent forth to grow in strength before returning to the whole." The words hit like physical blows, carrying with them a terrible certainty that felt like truth. Naruto felt his newly integrated identity waver as doubt crept in. What if they weren't really individuals at all? What if they were just extensions of their father's will, programmed to eventually return to him? "I can see the doubt in your eyes, Meliodas. You begin to understand. Every choice you've made, every bond you've forged, every moment of growth, all of it has been in service to this moment." "No," Naruto's voice was quiet but absolute. "You're wrong." "Am I? Then explain your protective instincts, your drive to lead, your willingness to sacrifice everything for those you deem worthy. These are not human traits, they are the reflexes of a king." They're the reflexes of a friend, Naruto countered. Of someone who's learned that real strength comes from connection, not domination. The Demon King fragment was silent for a moment, then began to laugh. Connection? You mean the bonds that make you weak. The emotional attachments that force you to limit your own power to avoid hurting others. The bonds that make us stronger than you ever were, Sasuke said, stepping forward to stand beside his brother. Alone, you were powerful. But alone, you were also defeated. By treachery and trickery, not by strength, but no matter. If you will not return to me willingly, I will simply take what is mine by force. The entity raised one hand and power erupted from it like a tsunami, not the focused energy of a technique, but raw force that sought to overwhelm through sheer magnitude. It slammed into Naruto and Sasuke like a physical wall, driving them to their knees and making their bones creak under the pressure. This is what real power looks like, the fragment's voice whispered in their minds. Not your careful techniques or your restrained emotions, but absolute dominion over reality itself. But even as the crushing force threatened to break them, Naruto felt something else stirring. Not his own power this time, but something familiar and warm. Captain, Ban's spirit materialized beside him, translucent but grinning with manic glee. Miss us? More figures began to appear, King floating with his usual sardonic expression, Diane cracking her knuckles in anticipation of a good fight, Gowther studying the situation with analytical interest, Merlin already beginning to weave complex magical patterns in the air. And finally, Eskener, blazing with the light of high noon despite being incorporeal. It appears we have a family dispute to settle, he announced with characteristic dramatic flair. The Demon King fragment recoiled slightly at their appearance. Impossible, you are dead, dust and memory, nothing more. Death is just another state of being, Merlin said conversationally. And we've been waiting for this reunion for quite some time. Haven't we, boys? 3,000 years of boredom, Ban confirmed. You have no idea how much fun we're going to have with you. The pressure crushing Naruto and Sasuke suddenly eased as the sins combined will pushed back against their former enemy. But this wasn't their fight alone. Through the broken walls of the council chamber, other figures were arriving. Kakashi burst through the entrance with his Sharingan already active, followed by Jiraiya, whose hands were already forming the seals for his most powerful techniques. Behind them came more of Konoha's finest, Guy, Asuma, Kurenai, and dozens of others who had felt the supernatural battle beginning and come running. What is that thing? Jiraiya shouted over the sound of reality warping around them. Our father, Naruto called back, pushing himself to his feet as power flowed through him like molten metal. Or what's left of him? Mortals, the Demon King fragment said with disgust. Insects pretending to matter. Allow me to educate you about your place in the natural order. He gestured, and the malevolent creatures that had been lurking at the edges of reality surged forward. But these weren't like the confused demons from earlier encounters. These were pure expressions of malice, hunger given form, nightmares that had learned to think. The battle that followed defied every rule of conventional warfare. Naruto found himself fighting alongside the spirit of Ban, their combined techniques creating attacks that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously. Sasuke moved with King's guidance, his speed and precision enhanced by 3,000 years of tactical knowledge. The ninja of Konoha fought with desperate courage against enemies that shouldn't have been able to exist, their techniques adapted on the fly to combat opponents made of living darkness and crystallized hatred. But it wasn't enough. The Demon King fragment was too strong, too experienced, too willing to sacrifice anything and everything to achieve victory. For every creature they destroyed, he summoned two more. For every attack they launched, he countered with something more devastating. You begin to understand, he said, his voice carrying over the chaos of battle. This is why power must be consolidated, why strength must flow from one source. Your divided loyalties make you weak. A blast of pure entropy caught Kakashi in the chest, sending him flying across the chamber. Jiraiya tried to summon Gamabunta, but the frog was banished back to Mount Myoboku before he could fully manifest. We're losing, Naruto realized. And if we lose here, he'll use our power to remake the world in his image. That was when he felt it, not just his own power or the guidance of his old teammates, but something else. Something that had been building throughout his integration process but had remained dormant until now. Love. Not romantic love, though that was part of it, but something broader and deeper, love for his friends, his village, his world. Love for Sasuke despite their complicated history. Love for the memories of his fallen comrades and their willingness to sacrifice everything for others. The realization hit him like lightning. The Demon King fragment was wrong about power flowing from one source. Real power, sustainable power, came from connection, from being part of something larger than yourself. Together, he said, his voice somehow carrying to every friendly presence in the chamber. All of us together. He reached out with his enhanced senses, touching the chakra signatures of every ninja in the room, the spiritual essence of every sin, even the confused and frightened energy of the citizens huddled in their homes throughout the village. I won't let you hurt them, any of them. Power erupted from Naruto, but this time it wasn't the dark energy of demon magic or the raw force of the Nine Tails. This was something new entirely. Human determination enhanced by demonic strength, ninja techniques guided by ancient wisdom, individual will supported by collective love. His appearance shifted one final time, but instead of the previous transformations that had emphasized either his human or demon nature, this showed perfect integration. Golden light mixed with shadow, wings that were neither purely dark nor purely bright, eyes that held both the innocence of Naruto Uzumaki and the hard-won wisdom of Meliodas. Perfect balance mode. The name came to him unbidden, along with the knowledge of what he could do in this state. Not just command power, but harmonize it. Not just fight alone, but coordinate the strength of everyone around him. Impossible, the Demon King fragment whispered. You cannot transcend your nature. You are what I made you to be. No, Naruto said, his voice carrying the absolute certainty of someone who had finally found their true self. I am what I chose to become. The final battle was about to begin in earnest. And for the first time since this whole crisis started, Naruto was absolutely certain they were going to win. Perfect balance mode felt like coming home after a lifetime of wandering. Naruto could sense everything, the fear radiating from his friends as they faced impossible odds, the malevolent hunger of the shadow creatures, the ancient rage of the Demon King fragment, and underneath it all, something else. Something warm and familiar approaching fast through the village streets. Hinata. She was coming, along with what felt like half of Konoha's population. Civilians and ninja alike, drawn by the supernatural battle raging at the heart of their home. Your mortal allies arrive, the Demon King fragment observed with amusement. How fitting that they should witness your failure firsthand. They're not here to witness anything, Naruto said, golden light swirling around him like liquid sunlight. They're here to help. Help, the entity laughed, a sound like breaking glass. What could insects possibly offer in a battle between gods? The answer came in the form of Hinata bursting through the ruined wall of the council chamber, her Byakugan active and her face set with grim determination. Behind her came a stream of people, Iruka with a squad of academy instructors, Shikamaru leading a group of chunin, even old man Tuchai carrying what looked like a battle-ready ladle. Sorry we're late, Hinata called out, taking in the chaos with the rapid assessment of a veteran ninja. We felt the energy disturbance from across the village. Hinata, get out of here, Naruto started to say, but she cut him off with a look that could have melted steel. Don't even think about it, Naruto-kun. I told you before, I believe in all of you. That includes the scary parts. The simple declaration hit him like a thunderbolt. Not just the words, but the absolute conviction behind them. She wasn't here out of duty or obligation. She was here because she loved him, all of him, including the parts that could level mountains, just like Elizabeth. The realization brought with it a flood of memories, but not the painful ones he'd been carrying. These were different, moments of quiet understanding, of acceptance without conditions, of love that didn't ask him to be less than he was. Elizabeth tending his wounds after a particularly brutal battle, her touch gentle despite the blood on his hands. Elizabeth talking him through a nightmare at 3 in the morning, her voice patient even though his thrashing had woken her for the 4th time that week. Elizabeth looking at him with those impossibly kind eyes and saying, "You're not your worst moments, Meliodas, you're the choice to be better." Impossible, the Demon King fragment snarled. Love is weakness, connection is vulnerability. I will show you the price of such foolishness. He raised both hands, and the air around them began to tear. Not just reality distortions this time, but genuine rifts in the fabric of existence itself. Through the cracks, Naruto could see glimpses of other realms, places where the Demon King's vision had taken root, where power flowed from the strong to the weak in an endless cascade of suffering. That's what he wants to turn our world into. The shadow creatures surged forward with renewed fury, but this time they weren't just targeting the ninja. They went after everyone, the academy instructors, the civilian volunteers, even old Tuchai with his impromptu weapon. Choose Meliodas, the fragment commanded. Your power or their lives, you cannot have both. For a split second, Naruto hesitated. The math was simple. He could unleash his full strength and destroy every threat in the chamber, but the collateral damage would kill dozens of innocent people. Or he could hold back and watch helplessly as creatures of pure malice tore apart everyone he cared about. The same impossible choice that broke me 3,000 years ago, but this time was different. This time he wasn't facing the choice alone. Naruto-kun, Hinata's voice cut through his spiral of doubt. You don't have to choose, we're all here, use our strength too, our strength. The words sparked something in his mind, not a memory this time, but an understanding. The Demon King fragment was thinking like a tyrant, seeing power as something that flowed from one source to many, but real strength worked differently. Real strength was multiplicative, not additive. Naruto reached out with his enhanced senses, touching the chakra signature of everyone in the chamber. Not to dominate or control them, but to connect with them. To share his power and accept theirs in return. The effect was instantaneous. Kakashi's Chidori suddenly blazed with golden light, cutting through shadow creatures like they were made of paper. Jiroya's techniques took on impossible complexity as ancient knowledge flowed through their connection. Gai's taijutsu became something beyond human limitations, each strike enhanced by demonic strength but guided by human heart. Even the civilians found themselves moving with enhanced speed and coordination, their improvised weapons cutting through enemies that should have been impossible for normal people to harm. What? The Demon King fragment started to say, but Ban's spirit interrupted him with a cheerful wave. Cooperative multiplier effect, the thief explained happily. Captain always was better at the team-building stuff than you were. Turns out shared power is more efficient than hoarded power. Who knew? This is not possible, the entity raged. Power cannot be shared without being diminished. It is a law of existence. Your law, Merlin's spirit corrected, her magical diagrams suddenly including every person in the chamber. Based on scarcity thinking, but what if power isn't a finite resource? What if it's something that grows when shared properly? The Demon King fragment's form began to waver as the fundamental assumptions underlying his existence were challenged. He was the embodiment of hierarchy, of power flowing from strong to weak, but faced with a network where everyone was both giving and receiving strength. Enough, he screamed, and the sound shattered every window in the building. I will not be defeated by your pathetic philosophy. I am power itself. He gathered every bit of malevolent energy in the chamber, drawing from the shadow creatures, from the rifts in reality, from his own essence. The attack he prepared wasn't just designed to kill, it was meant to erase, to remove his targets from existence so completely that they would never have existed at all. This ends now, my son. Return to me or cease to be entirely. The attack launched, a wave of pure negation that sought to unmake everything it touched, and Naruto met it head-on, but not alone. Sasuke stepped up beside him, their combined power creating a barrier of light and shadow that held back the wave of destruction. Behind them, the spirits of the 7 deadly sins added their strength to the defense. And behind them, every ninja and civilian in the chamber channeled their chakra through the connection Naruto had established. Together, the word echoed through their shared consciousness, not spoken aloud but felt by everyone in the network. Together, they were more than the sum of their parts. Together, they could face anything. But it still wasn't enough to win, only to survive. That was when Hinata did something that changed everything. She stepped forward past the barrier of combined power and walked directly toward the Demon King fragment. Hinata, no. Naruto tried to break his concentration to stop her, but she shook her head. Trust me, she said simply, and remember what love can do. She reached the entity just as his attack intensified, the wave of negation washing over her like black fire. But instead of being erased, something impossible happened. She began to glow, not with chakra or any technique Naruto had ever seen, but with something purer. Light that spoke of every kind word ever spoken, every act of kindness ever performed, every moment when someone chose love over fear. What are you? The Demon King fragment whispered, his attack faltering. I'm someone who loves him, Hinata said, reaching out to touch the entity's shifting form, all of him. The parts that are human and the parts that are divine and the parts that are so broken they think they can never heal. Her hand made contact and light exploded outward, not the harsh illumination of destruction, but something warm and healing and absolutely unstoppable. This is what Elizabeth tried to show me, Naruto realized. This is what I never understood. Love wasn't weakness. Love was the strongest force in any universe because it was the only power that grew when it was given away. The light spread through the chamber, touching every shadow creature and transforming them back into confused but grateful humans. It washed over the rifts in reality, healing the tears and sealing them shut. Most importantly, it enveloped the Demon King fragment himself. "No," he whispered as the light began to change him. "I am hatred, I am domination, I am—" "You're afraid," Hinata said gently. "You've been alone so long that you've forgotten what it feels like to be connected to something larger than yourself." The entity's form began to shift, the armor of shadow and flame dissolving to reveal what lay beneath. Not a monster, but a figure that looked remarkably like an older version of Naruto, tired, lonely, and carrying the weight of impossible choices. "I was supposed to protect them," he said, his voice small and broken. "The demon realm, my people, I thought strength was the only way. I thought fear was the only currency that mattered." "It's not," Naruto said, stepping forward to join Hinata. "I know because I made the same mistakes. But there's another way. Show me." The request was barely a whisper, but it carried the weight of 3,000 years of loneliness. So Naruto did. He reached out, not with power but with understanding, and shared everything he'd learned about connection, about friendship, about the strength that came from protecting others instead of dominating them. The transformation was gradual but profound. The Demon King fragment didn't disappear. Instead, he changed, becoming something new. Still powerful, still ancient, but guided by love instead of fear. "I understand now," he said, his voice carrying wonder. "I was never meant to rule alone. I was meant to serve, to protect, to help others find their own strength." The light that had been pouring from Hinata suddenly expanded, touching every person in the chamber and beyond. Through the network Naruto had established, it reached across the entire village, then across the continent, then across the world itself. For just a moment, every human being on the planet felt it, a reminder that they were connected, that they were loved, that they were part of something larger and more wonderful than they had ever imagined. The curse that had bound Meliodas and Elizabeth across lifetimes finally shattered, its power transformed from chain to blessing. When the light faded, the chamber was silent except for the sound of people breathing in wonder. Naruto found himself back in his normal form, exhausted but whole in a way he'd never been before. Beside him, Hinata swayed on her feet and he caught her before she could fall. "Did we win?" she asked softly. "We did something better," he replied, looking around at the transformed chamber filled with friends and family and former enemies who had become something new. "We chose love over fear." The Demon King fragment, no longer a fragment but something healed and whole, knelt before them with genuine respect. "Thank you," he said simply, "for showing me what I had forgotten, for reminding me that true strength serves others rather than itself." He began to fade, but not into nothingness. Instead, he dispersed into points of light that settled into every person in the chamber, becoming part of them, adding his wisdom and experience to their own without overwhelming their individual natures. "Go well, my sons. Build the world I was too afraid to dream of." And then he was gone, leaving behind only warmth and the lingering sense of a burden finally lifted. The crisis was over. But as Naruto helped Hinata to her feet and looked around at the faces of everyone who had stood with them, he realized something important. The real story wasn't ending, it was just beginning. 5 years later, the Hokage's office had never been quite the same since the day reality had been temporarily rewritten within its walls. The stone was a different color where it had been rebuilt, and sometimes, when the light hit it just right, you could see faint traces of golden energy still flowing through the repairs. Naruto sat behind the desk that had once belonged to the third Hokage, then Tsunade, reviewing mission reports with the kind of focused attention that would have amazed his old academy instructors. The orange jumpsuit was long gone, replaced by formal robes that somehow managed to be both dignified and distinctly his own style. The seventh Hokage, they called him now. Though privately, he sometimes wondered if first Demon King Hokage might be more accurate. "The delegation from the Hidden Sand arrives tomorrow," Shizune said, setting another stack of papers on his desk. "They're particularly interested in the integration program." Naruto nodded, making a note on his calendar. Over the past 5 years, word had spread about Konoha's unique approach to handling supernatural awakenings. Other villages had begun sending their own unusual cases. Ninja who'd started manifesting powers that didn't fit conventional understanding, people who claimed to remember past lives, individuals whose chakra had begun exhibiting properties that defied explanation. The Integration Center had started as a small project in the old training ground 44. Now it occupied an entire district, with specialists, counselors, and support staff helping people navigate the complex process of accepting expanded identities. "How's our newest arrival?" he asked. "The girl who claims to be the reincarnation of a phoenix goddess. She set 3 training dummies on fire yesterday, but she also healed a Chunin's broken arm just by touching it." Shizune consulted her notes. "Diane's spirit has been working with her. Something about teaching the difference between destructive fire and healing warmth." Even 5 years later, the spirits of the 7 deadly sins occasionally manifested to help with particularly challenging cases. Death, it turned out, was more of a career change than an ending when you'd spent lifetimes learning to transcend normal limitations. "Any word from the research division about the worldwide phenomenon?" Naruto asked. "Still happening. Jiraiya estimates that approximately 1 in 10,000 people globally have experienced some form of awakening since the night you broke the dimensional barriers." Shizune's expression grew more serious. "Most are minor enhanced intuition, slight increases in chakra capacity, occasional prophetic dreams, but some are like us," Naruto finished. "Complete identity integration with beings of significant power." It was the unintended consequence of that final battle. When love had washed across the world, it hadn't just healed the immediate crisis. It had weakened the barriers between past and present, allowing souls with unfinished business to reconnect with their current incarnations. The world was slowly but steadily becoming more magical, more complex, more connected. It was also becoming more dangerous, which was why the Integration Center's work was so crucial. A knock on the door interrupted his thoughts. "Come in." Sasuke entered, carrying what looked like a travel pack and wearing clothes suitable for a long journey. Despite 5 years of integration therapy and regular meditation with King's spirit, he still moved with the unconscious grace of someone trained in multiple forms of lethal combat. "The mission to the Land of Waves is approved," he said, settling into the chair across from Naruto's desk. 3 confirmed awakening cases, all showing signs of incomplete integration. "I should be back within 2 weeks. Be careful," Naruto said. "The reports suggest one of them might be manifesting abilities related to time manipulation. I'll take backup." "Shikamaru's team is due for a field assignment anyway." Sasuke paused, studying his friend's face. "You look tired." "Paperwork," Naruto said with a rueful smile. "Turns out running a village involves a lot more forms than I expected." "Also, you were up until 3 a.m. in the meditation gardens again," Sasuke said dryly. "I could sense your chakra signature from across the village." Naruto couldn't deny it. Despite the successful integration, despite 5 years of relative peace, he still found himself drawn to the quiet spaces where he could commune with the memories of his past life. Not out of distress anymore, but out of a need to maintain the balance between who he had been and who he was becoming. "The memories are still settling," he admitted. 3,000 years of experience doesn't integrate overnight. "Neither does learning to trust happiness," Sasuke said, and his tone carried the weight of personal experience. "But that's what we have to do, isn't it? Trust that we deserve the life we've built." It was a conversation they'd had many times over the years, in various forms. 2 former demon princes learning to be human, learning to accept love and friendship and the simple pleasure of a peaceful day. "Speaking of which," Sasuke continued, his expression shifting to something that might have been amusement, "someone's waiting for you in the memorial garden. Something about a picnic and your complete inability to take a day off." Naruto felt his heart lift despite the pile of unfinished work on his desk. "Hinata, she's been planning it for a week. Apparently she recruited Iruka to help with the food, and Sakura provided medical-grade guilt about your work-life balance." "I should finish these reports." "The reports will wait," Sasuke said firmly. "The woman who walked into a manifestation of pure malevolence because she loved you won't." The reminder of that night 5 years ago still made Naruto's chest tight with emotion. Hinata had nearly died channeling the power needed to heal the Demon King fragment. She'd spent 3 days unconscious while her body recovered from exposure to forces that should have killed her instantly. But she'd survived. More than that, she'd been changed by the experience, gaining insights and abilities that made her uniquely suited to help others navigate their own supernatural awakenings. "You're right," Naruto said, standing and moving toward the door. "Hold down the fort while I'm gone. Always." The memorial garden was one of the few places in the village that had remained completely unchanged by the events of 5 years ago. Stone monuments to fallen heroes stood in peaceful rows, surrounded by flowers that bloomed year-round thanks to subtle applications of the same healing energy that had saved the world. Naruto found Hinata sitting beneath the memorial to the third Hokage, a picnic spread out on a blanket beside her. She traded her usual formal clothes for something more casual, and her hair was loose around her shoulders in a way that still made his breath catch. "You came," she said, looking up with a smile that could have powered the entire village. "Did you really think I wouldn't?" he asked, settling beside her on the blanket. "I thought you might try to finish all your paperwork first, then arrive here at sunset apologizing profusely for being late." The accuracy of her prediction made him laugh. "You know me too well. I should hope so, after 5 years of dating the Hokage." She handed him a rice ball that had been carefully shaped to look like a fox. "Though I have to admit, you're much more punctual now than when we were teenagers." They ate in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the sounds of the village around them. Children laughing as they played in the streets, merchants calling out their wares, the distant sound of ninja training in the academy grounds. Normal sounds of a normal day in a peaceful village. "I've been thinking about Elizabeth," Hinata said eventually. Naruto looked at her sharply. They'd talked about his past life many times over the years, but Hinata rarely brought up his former love without a specific reason. "What about her? About what she would think of all this?" Hinata gestured vaguely at the village around them. "The integration center, the worldwide awakenings, you becoming Hokage. Whether she'd be proud of what you've accomplished." The question caught him off guard. In all his meditation, in all his processing of ancient memories, he'd never really considered Elizabeth's perspective on his current life. "I think," he said slowly, "she'd be amazed by what you've accomplished. Me. You're the one who figured out how to heal corruption with love instead of just destroying it. You're the one who developed the techniques we use to help people integrate traumatic awakening experiences. You're the one who walked into a manifestation of pure hatred and convinced it to choose redemption." Hinata blushed, but she didn't deflect the praise the way she once would have. 5 years of being recognized as one of the world's foremost experts on supernatural psychology had given her a confidence that complemented her natural gentleness. "We did that together," she said. "We did a lot of things together, but the core insight that love could transform instead of just defeating, that was yours." They fell silent again, but it was a comfortable quiet. Around them, the memorial garden held its own peace, honoring the past while embracing the present. "Naruto-kun," Hinata said eventually, her voice carrying a note of nervous excitement that made him pay attention. "There's something I need to tell you." Before he could ask what, she reached into the picnic basket and pulled out a small box. Not a ring box, something different, more ornate, with symbols carved into the wood that looked familiar but not quite recognizable. "I had this made by the same craftsman who creates the containment vessels for unstable chakra artifacts," she said, setting the box between them on the blanket. "It's designed to safely hold items with significant supernatural resonance." Naruto felt his heartbeat accelerate. "Hinata, what's in the box?" Instead of answering, she opened it. Inside, nestled in silk that seemed to shimmer with its own light, was a ring. But not just any ring. This one was carved from what looked like crystallized starlight, with inlays that seemed to shift between silver and gold depending on the angle. Just looking at it made Naruto's enhanced senses tingle with recognition. "It's made from metal that fell from the sky 3,000 years ago," Hinata said, her voice soft but steady. "The same meteor that contained trace amounts of the energy signature you and Sasuke carry. I had it researched, and it turns out that meteor fragments have been used throughout history to create items that could bridge the gap between mortal and divine." Naruto stared at the ring, understanding flooding through him like lightning. "This is a proposal ring designed specifically for someone whose soul has loved across multiple lifetimes," Hinata finished. "Because I wanted to make sure that when I asked you to marry me, the ring would be something that could contain and channel the full depth of what we feel for each other." The words hung in the air between them, carrying weight that had nothing to do with sound and everything to do with the fundamental shift they represented. "You're proposing to me?" Naruto asked, his voice coming out smaller than he'd intended. "I'm proposing to all of you," Hinata corrected. "Naruto Uzumaki, who taught me that I was worth believing in. Meliodas, who learned that love was stronger than power. And whoever you might become in the future, as you continue growing and changing and becoming more yourself." She took the ring from the box, and it seemed to pulse with its own heartbeat. "The question is," she continued, meeting his eyes with absolute certainty, "will you marry me?" For a moment, Naruto couldn't speak. The weight of the question, the beauty of the gesture, the sheer impossibility of finding someone who loved him enough to propose with a ring designed to handle the supernatural complexity of his existence. It was overwhelming in the best possible way. "Yes," he said finally. "Yes, absolutely, completely, forever yes." The ring slid onto his finger like it had been made for him specifically, which it probably had. The moment it settled into place, Naruto felt something shift, not dramatically, but in a way that felt like the last piece of a puzzle clicking into place. He was complete. Not just integrated, but whole in a way that transcended any single lifetime. "I love you," he said, pulling Hinata close. "All of me loves all of you, across every lifetime we've had and everyone we might have in the future." "Good," she said, settling into his arms with the satisfaction of someone whose carefully planned surprise had gone exactly according to plan. "Because you're stuck with me now." They sat together in the memorial garden as the sun set over Konoha, surrounded by the quiet presence of honored dead and the living promise of tomorrow. Around them, the village went about its evening routines, lights coming on in windows, families gathering for dinner, the night shift taking over guard duties. Normal activities in a world that was slowly becoming more magical every day. "So," Naruto said eventually, "when do you want to have the wedding?" "I was thinking spring," Hinata replied. "Give us time to plan properly, and to figure out how to handle a guest list that includes both living dignitaries and the occasional manifestation of ancient spirits." "Ban's going to want to give a speech," Naruto realized with dawning horror. "I was counting on it. Someone needs to embarrass you with stories from your previous incarnation." They laughed together as stars began to appear overhead, the same stars that had watched over them through multiple lifetimes and would continue long after they were gone. But for now, in this moment, in this life, they had each other and the promise of a future built on love instead of fear. The seventh Hokage and his soon-to-be wife sat in peaceful contentment, surrounded by the village they'd helped save and the world they'd helped heal. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, more awakening cases to handle, more diplomatic meetings to attend, more paperwork to process. But tonight was theirs, a moment of perfect happiness earned through struggle and sacrifice and the courage to choose love over easier paths. In the distance, thunder rolled across clear skies, not a storm, but the sound of reality itself celebrating the completion of a story 3,000 years in the making. The curse was broken. The king had found his queen. And the real adventure was just beginning. 10 years later, tell us about the old days, Dad. Naruto looked up from the mission scroll he'd been reviewing to find his daughter perched on the edge of his desk, her blonde hair catching the afternoon light streaming through the office windows. At 8 years old, she already showed signs of the determination that had defined both sides of her family, along with an unfortunate tendency to ignore the concept of office hours. "Which old days?" he asked, setting aside his work with the practiced patience of a parent who'd learned to recognize when his attention was being claimed. "The really old days. When you and Uncle Sasuke fought demons and saved the world." From the corner of the office, where he'd been reviewing intelligence reports, Sasuke looked up with an expression of amusement. "Those weren't the old days, Himawari. That was just Tuesday. But it was exciting. Tell me about the time Mom walked into pure evil and convinced it to be good instead." Naruto exchanged glances with his old teammate. The kids had grown up hearing stories about their parents' adventures, but they'd always been carefully edited versions, focusing on the heroics while glossing over the more existential complexities of identity integration and ancient curses. But Himawari was getting older and more perceptive. It was probably time for a more complete version. "All right," Naruto said, lifting his daughter onto his lap. "But it's a long story and some parts are pretty complicated." "I like complicated stories," Himawari said decisively. "In that case," Naruto began, settling back in his chair, "it started with dreams about a woman I'd never met and power I didn't understand." Outside, the village of Konoha went about its afternoon routines. In the Integration Center, specialists helped newly awakened individuals navigate the complexities of expanded identity. In the academy, students learned techniques that combined traditional ninja arts with principles borrowed from ancient magical theory. In homes throughout the village, families gathered for dinner and told stories of their own adventures in a world where the impossible had become merely unusual. The legend of the Demon King's reincarnation had become history. But the story of Naruto Uzumaki, 7th Hokage, devoted husband, and father who sometimes had to explain why Uncle Sasuke could make his eyes glow gold, was still being written one day at a time. And in the quiet moments between official duties and family responsibilities, when he meditated in gardens that bloomed with supernatural energy, or stood watch over a village that had learned to accept the magical alongside the mundane, Naruto sometimes felt the presence of old friends. The the spirits of the seven deadly sins, offering approval and occasional sarcastic commentary on his domestic happiness. "Not bad, Captain," Ban's voice would whisper on the wind, "not bad at all." The curse was broken, the world was healing, and love, as always, had found a way. From confused Jinchuriki to integrated Demon King, what a journey, right? Naruto found his balance, Sasuke found his way back, and somehow love really did conquer a 3,000-year-old curse. Classic. Which scene broke your brain? The reality-warping family therapy session. Hinata casually walking into pure evil. That proposal scene. Sound off below, I'm genuinely curious what landed for you. More crossover chaos coming your way if you stick around. Until next time.